Good evening, night owls, and welcome to Whisper Crowley. Tonight, I will guide you into a world of darkness, hoping to help you relax and unwind. Perhaps some of you will even drift into a haunting yet soothing sleep. Before we begin, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. And now, we begin. My name is Santiago, and I need to tell you something that still keeps me awake at night. I've never been one to believe in the paranormal. I'm the type who looks for logical explanations first. But what happened with my daughter? Well, it's something I still struggle to talk about freely, even now. My daughter Emma was 6 years old when we moved to a bigger house in Sacramento. I wanted to give her something special for her new bedroom, a little housewarming gift just for her. One Sunday morning, while browsing a weekend flea market near the old downtown area, I spotted this beautiful pink dresser. It was medium-sized with 2 doors and a mirror on the side, decorated with princess stickers that were starting to peel at the edges. The piece was obviously used, but it had charm, and the price was incredible, only $25. The elderly vendor, a woman with kind eyes and weathered hands, told me it belonged to a little girl who had outgrown it. She seemed eager to sell it, almost relieved when I agreed to take it off her hands. I went home, grabbed my truck, and came back with a dolly to haul it away. My wife Sarah and I set it up in Emma's room that very afternoon. Our daughter was absolutely thrilled. We helped her organize her clothes inside, arrange her dolls on the shelves, and she even placed her little perfume bottles on the mirror's ledge. She was so excited, running her tiny fingers over every surface like she'd discovered treasure. But that excitement didn't last long. Within just a few nights, Emma started telling us something that made us chuckle at first. She said someone was knocking from inside the dresser. We figured it was probably a mouse that had gotten trapped, or maybe just her imagination running wild. You know how kids are. But she kept insisting. She described these soft, gentle taps like someone barely scratching with their fingernails from the inside. As the days passed, Emma's behavior began to change. She started talking to herself in the early morning hours, around 2 or 3 a.m. Sometimes we'd hear her giggling softly in the darkness. We'd get up thinking she was talking in her sleep, but when we'd peek into her room, there she'd be wide awake, sitting up in bed, staring directly at the pink dresser. One night we finally asked her, "Honey, who are you talking to?" "Victoria," she replied, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Victoria, that name meant nothing to us. But then Emma explained that Victoria spoke to her every night from inside the dresser. We tried not to panic, telling ourselves it was just an imaginary friend, completely normal for a child her age. But the strange thing was, every single night at exactly 2 or 3 in the morning, we'd hear sounds coming from her room. Whispered conversations, soft laughter, and sometimes even the dresser doors opening and closing on their own. One afternoon, while checking Emma's homework because her grades had started slipping, we found a drawing that made our blood run cold. It was obviously done by a child's hand, but the image was unmistakable. A thin woman wearing what looked like a hospital gown. She had no legs, she was floating above the ground. Emma had colored the eyes large and completely black, no pupils, and the mouth was stretched impossibly wide from ear to ear. Just a black void where teeth should be. Long, dark hair flowed down to the figure's waist. We called Emma over and asked who it was. "That's Victoria," she said without a trace of fear. She's the lady who lives in the dresser. She told me it used to belong to her daughter, who bought it many years ago. That's when real fear crept into our hearts. That same night, we decided to send Emma to stay with her grandmother. We thought if we could get her away from the room, away from the dresser, these strange episodes would stop. We drove her across town to my mother's house and returned home alone. But at 11:30 that night, with just Sarah and me in the house, we started hearing whispers coming from Emma's empty bedroom. Then came the familiar tapping sounds, the same sounds we'd been hearing every night, the same sounds we'd assumed Emma was making. And then the dresser doors began opening and closing by themselves. I gathered my courage and went to investigate. The room was empty, but something felt wrong, heavy, oppressive. I opened the dresser doors and started moving the clothes around, searching for any animal that might have gotten trapped inside. Nothing. Then I opened the smaller door with the mirror. It was a tiny compartment, barely big enough for anything, but I checked it anyway. When I found nothing, I felt foolish and closed it. But the moment I shut that door, a sweet smell flooded the room. It was like vanilla perfume, but old and sickly sweet, almost nauseating. And then came those same knocks from inside the dresser. I froze. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw something moving in the back between the hanging clothes. Something that looked like fabric or maybe hair. I called for Sarah. She came running, and together we searched everything again, thinking it had to be some kind of animal. But when she opened the small mirror door and closed it again, she went completely silent. I watched the color drain from her face in seconds. I saw her, she whispered, tears forming in her eyes. Saw who? Her. She was behind us. I saw her in the mirror. What Sarah described matched exactly what Emma had drawn. Floating without legs, wearing a hospital gown, that horrible black mouth, staring directly at her from the reflection. There was no way she could have made that up. Sarah isn't the type to imagine things or make up stories. At midnight, without saying another word, we dragged that dresser out to the street and left it by the curb for anyone to take. We were done with it. The next morning, we started to convince ourselves it had all been suggestion, stress, our minds playing tricks on us. We were actually laughing about it and considering bringing the dresser back inside when our neighbor knocked on the door at 9 a.m. He looked tired and a little spooked. "Hey, is everything okay?" he asked. We told him yes, asking why he was concerned. "Well, last night around 1 in the morning, I started hearing a woman whispering from that dresser. I thought maybe you folks were having an argument or someone was playing a prank, but you guys were clearly asleep by then." That confirmed everything. Everything Emma had been telling us was true. The garbage truck took the dresser away that same week. Since then, our house has been peaceful again. Emma, too. She's 18 now. Sometimes we ask her if she remembers Victoria. She just smiles, but avoids the topic. She says when she was little, she didn't understand that the woman who visited her in the dresser was no longer alive. But I know she remembers, and I know she understood more than we thought she did. I hope you enjoyed the first story. If you did, don't forget to leave a like. But if I didn't do my job well, feel free to give it a thumbs down. Either way, drop a comment and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now, let's continue. What I'm about to share happened to my cousin Maria. And even though years have passed, I swear I can't look at a baby crib without remembering what she went through. Maria was 7 months pregnant when she decided to start buying everything the baby would need. She was so excited about every little detail. The clothes, diapers, toys, everything had to be perfect. One afternoon, while browsing through a consignment shop near Riverside Cemetery in Austin, she found this beautiful white wooden crib in excellent condition. And the price was amazing, only $60. The shop owner, a middle-aged man with tired eyes, told her it had barely been used. The previous owners had to let it go quickly, he said, not meeting her eyes when he spoke. Maria didn't think twice, she bought it on the spot. Since her apartment wasn't very big, she placed the crib right next to her bed. She arranged it beautifully with clean sheets, hung a mobile with little stars above it, and had everything ready for when the baby arrived. Everything seemed normal at first. The first night, nothing strange happened. But the next day, after her husband Mike left for work early in the morning, the paranormal activity began. She was sitting on the couch, resting her feet, when suddenly the entire apartment filled with a scent. It was very specific, that sweet, fresh smell of a newly bathed baby, but intense, as if someone had opened a bottle of baby lotion and poured it throughout the house. She checked to see if she'd accidentally opened any creams or lotions, but nothing was out of place. At first, she thought it might be her pregnancy hormones or her anxiety about having the baby making her smell things that weren't there. But the days continued, and things didn't get better. They got worse. On the third night, she had a dream about a baby. She said she was holding it in her arms, but she couldn't see its face. There was a blanket covering it that she couldn't seem to remove. But she could feel the weight of it, and it was cold. So cold, like it wasn't breathing. She woke up distressed, but told herself it was normal to have strange dreams during pregnancy, especially with all the fears and anxieties that come with expecting your first child. However, on the fourth day, things took a serious turn. She was making lunch when she heard a rhythmic creaking sound, like something was rocking back and forth. Like the crib was moving by itself. Her heart started racing as she walked toward the bedroom. Knowing exactly what that sound was, she was certain it was the crib. But just moments before she reached the room, the sound stopped. When she entered, everything was silent and still. This same thing happened the next day, and then again. Several times she heard the sound of the crib rocking on its own, and always, when she got close enough to see, the sound would fade away. One night when Mike came home from work, she decided to tell him everything. He tried to calm her down, suggesting maybe she was stressed, but while they were eating dinner, the sound started again. It was soft, measured, rhythmic. They both went to the bedroom, and this time they saw it. The crib was moving by itself slowly, gently rocking. No one was touching it. There was no wind, no open windows. It was just moving. They didn't sleep well that night. But around 3 in the morning, the worst thing happened. They were awakened by the sound of the crib, but in the darkness, they could see it was moving faster this time, more forcefully, as if someone was pushing it with increasing urgency. And then they heard it baby sounds. Soft babbling, clear as day, like there was an infant inside the crib. They turned on the lights and ran to check. The crib stopped moving immediately, and there was nothing there. Nothing at all. That was enough. They couldn't take any more. They waited until dawn, loaded the crib into their truck, and abandoned it in a park on the outskirts of their neighborhood. They didn't want to sell it or give it away. They just wanted it gone. The most chilling part came weeks later, when Maria was almost ready to give birth. An elderly neighbor from their building told her that the consignment shop where she'd bought the crib was known for selling items recovered from homes where someone had died. Often, she said, they sold baby items from families who had lost children babies who never made it home from the hospital, or who had passed away in their sleep. From that day forward, Maria never bought used baby items again. She couldn't take the risk. Her daughter Sophia was born healthy and beautiful 2 weeks later. But Maria still won't talk about that crib, and she's never set foot in another consignment shop near a cemetery. Some things, she says, carry too much sorrow to ever truly let go. Have you ever heard of doppelgangers? A kind of double of yourself. I know it sounds like pure fiction, but I lived through it. It all started with a greeting I never gave. I remember that night clearly. I got home a little later than usual. I work at an auto repair shop in Phoenix, and we'd gotten held up with a difficult delivery. It was almost 8:30 when I finally walked through the front door. I could smell dinner cooking and thought maybe I'd still catch something warm. But when my mom came out of the kitchen, she had this strange look on her face. "You left and came back again," she said to me. I just stood there confused. "What are you talking about?" She didn't answer right away, just stared at me like she was trying to figure something out. Then she let out this nervous little laugh. "About half an hour ago, you came in and went straight to your room. I said hello, but you didn't say anything back. You just went upstairs." I had no idea what to say. I assured her I hadn't been home all day, that I was just now arriving from work. My mom went quiet for a moment, then walked over and knocked on my bedroom door. Obviously, no one answered. I tried to calm her down, suggesting maybe she'd heard something else, or perhaps it was someone walking by on the street. But she looked at me with a paleness I'd never seen before. "I saw you, son, I saw you. You had the same clothes, the same backpack. I watched you go upstairs. You looked sad, and when I went up to check on you, you were lying in bed, sleeping." What she said gave me chills. I wanted to think maybe my sister had come home, but she wasn't even supposed to be back until the weekend. That week, things spiraled out of control. One night, I was watching a Netflix series with my mom in the living room when my sister started screaming from her bedroom. "Get away from there. You're scaring me." We both rushed to see what was happening, and when my sister saw me, her face filled with horror. She told us I had been pressed against her window, looking in, then ducking down and popping back up. But it wasn't me. My mom and I explained that I'd been with her the entire time, sitting on the couch watching TV. My sister was shaking. "But I saw you," she kept saying. "I saw your face." The thing is, her bedroom window faces our backyard, and you'd have to climb over a 6-foot fence and stand on some concrete blocks to even reach it. Why would I do something so bizarre? And more importantly, how could I be in 2 places at once? After those 2 paranormal encounters, it never happened again. But it was, without a doubt, the strangest and most unsettling experience our family has ever had. The worst part wasn't just that someone who looked exactly like me was appearing around our house. It was the way my family described this other version of me: sad, silent, almost ghost-like. Like it was me, but wrong somehow. Sometimes I wonder if it was trying to tell us something, or if it was stuck somehow, repeating the same actions over and over. Coming home, going to my room, lying down like it was the last thing I'd ever do. I've heard that doppelgangers are supposed to be a bad omen, a sign that something terrible is about to happen. But nothing bad happened to us, at least, not in the way you'd expect. The only thing that changed was that I started paying more attention to the little things. I made sure to always greet my mom when I came home. I never ignored my sister when she was talking to me. Maybe that other version of me was showing us what we could become if we stopped connecting with each other. If we became ghosts in our own home while we were still alive. Or maybe some things just don't have explanations, and we have to live with the mystery. All I know is that I still get nervous when I come home late, and I always say hello to my mom when I walk through that door. Welcome, listeners. Before I begin this tale, I'd like to know where you're tuning in from and what time of day you prefer to hear these stories. Feel free to drop a comment. Without further delay, let's begin. My name is Eugene Garcia. I'm 53 years old, and I've spent my entire life in a small farming community called Stone Ridge, nestled in the Sierra foothills of Northern California, between rolling hills and seasonal creek beds that run through Fresno County. I won't mention the exact township out of respect for the local folks, but I can tell you that on these inherited family lands, we grow heirloom corn, winter squash, beans, and the finest peppers you'll find anywhere, just like our fathers did and their fathers before them. I manage a plot of just over 2 acres that was assigned to me by the County Agricultural Cooperative years ago. It sits on a small hill surrounded by oak trees and manzanita shrubs. Good soil that produces well when the rains don't fail. I've always worked it alone with my hoe, my old tractor, and help from my sons when they're home from college. It's honest land that never gave me trouble until last year. What I'm about to tell you happened between July and September, during the height of planting season. That's when the hills turn green, humidity rises, and the dirt roads become slick with mud. Everything smells of wet earth, and the sky offers no rest. Mornings are heavy with fog that rolls down from the mountains like the land itself is breathing. That season, I noticed something strange happening on my plot. It all started one morning when I drove up with my pickup to drop off some bags of organic fertilizer. As always, I entered through the old dirt road that winds down from the ridge. I stopped beside the cornfield, and as I walked through the furrows, I saw something that puzzled me, a strip of disturbed earth, as if someone had dug and then carefully covered it back up. It was a straight line, not too deep, about 6 feet long and 18 inches wide. The soil was loose, as if it had been recently turned, but the strange thing was there were no boot prints, no tool marks, not even broken branches around it. And in that soft soil, everything leaves a trace. I thought it might have been some animal digging, a coyote looking for food, or maybe a badger. But animals don't dig so evenly, not with that kind of precision. I stood there for several minutes in silence, staring at the spot. Something made me uncomfortable. It was as if the earth had been opened and closed with the sole purpose of hiding something. I didn't tell anyone, not my wife, not the county office. I just noted it in my work journal as anomaly in section E4. I wrote it that way to make it sound technical, but the truth is, I was afraid to give it a name. A few days passed, and I continued working as usual, plowing, fertilizing, making sure the rainwater didn't wash away the seeds. One night in late July, we had a heavy storm, the kind that rattles tin roofs and breaks up the roads. The next day, I went up early to check the irrigation channels, in case the water had eroded the furrows. That's when I found another excavation. This time in the opposite corner of the plot, next to a large granite boulder we use as a reference point to mark the property line. It was a square hole, not very deep, but with edges so clean they looked like they'd been cut with a sharp spade. The earth was wet from the rain, but the inside of the hole had a dry layer. It had been dug before the storm hit. And again, no footprints, no tracks, no tool marks. I started to worry. That night I couldn't sleep well. I got up around 3 in the morning and sat on the porch to smoke a cigarette. The wind came down from the hills, cold and thick, and the dogs barked intermittently, as if they smelled something I couldn't detect. I made the decision to sleep on the property the following night. I brought my cot, a blanket, and a flashlight. I hid in the north ridge among the oak trees. From there, you can see almost the entire field. Nothing happened until after 1 in the morning. Then I heard a dull thud, soft but clear, like when a shovel hits against stone. I sat up. I turned on the flashlight and pointed it toward where I thought the sound came from. Nothing. I waited. Then came another sound, dirt falling, as if someone was digging in a hurry. I walked slowly, making no noise. When I reached the spot, I saw no one, just loose earth. And strangest of all, the hole I had seen before was open again, but there was no dirt around it, as if someone had taken it away. The next day I talked to old Mr. Pascal, an elderly man who was the first supervisor of the agricultural redistribution in the area. He lives higher up, along the trail that leads to the natural spring. I told him what I had seen, hoping he would laugh or tell me it was just nature's way, but he didn't. He stayed quiet for a while, sipping his coffee, then said, "That land has been disturbed before, many years ago." I asked him to explain. "Back in '83, he said, when rumors started that some men had hidden weapons in the hills. They said they were militia members or deserters, or who knows what. Some would come up with fuel containers and leave with heavy backpacks. Nobody found it convenient to talk about it, and one day they stopped coming. What does that have to do with my plot? That hill was used as a hiding place. They say they worked with surveyors' maps and buried things there, but nobody ever confirmed it. People only talked about it in whispers." I returned to my plot that same afternoon. This time I brought a small shovel and began to excavate carefully in the reopened hole, not out of morbid curiosity, but because I couldn't stand the uncertainty anymore. I dug calmly, removing thin layers, feeling every resistance under the damp earth. At about 20 inches down, I found something. At first I thought it was a thick root, but when I cleaned it better, I saw it was metal. It had the shape of a box, but with old rivets and rust around the edges. I pulled hard until I managed to extract it. It was a military case, one of those green, rectangular ones, heavy. I set it on the grass and opened it with my knife. Inside were 2 objects wrapped in plastic. One was a long package covered with oily cloth, and the other was a black bag tied with tape. I opened the first one. It was an old rifle, rusty but functional, a Russian model, as I later recognized. The second package contained something that made me drop the bag instantly, a handful of photographs. Black and white photos of armed men, some hooded, others in uniforms I didn't recognize. In one of them, a group appeared in formation with the hills in the background. In another, a young face, too sharp in focus. These weren't official photographs. They were memories, records, evidence of something. I put everything back and buried the case in the same spot. I didn't dare take it with me. I returned to town and didn't speak to anyone. That night someone passed by my house and left a folded paper at the door. Don't open the earth again. There are things that must stay buried. Since then, I haven't interfered. I closed off the plot for a few days and pretended I was sick. When I returned, the hole was covered. There were no more marks. Everything looked like before. Months passed. I harvested what I could, but since that day, every time I plant, I feel that the earth is no longer just earth. I feel it holds things, that it breathes with secrets, that it doesn't want to be disturbed. I keep farming, but I no longer stay overnight, and every time I dig deeper than necessary, I stop. Because I know that down there are still things that someone doesn't want to surface. And if you ever get assigned a plot on a secluded hill where the earth seems softer than normal, and the corn doesn't grow the same way, think twice before you dig. Because not everything that sprouts in California comes from the rain. When I was a little girl, I lived with my mother in my grandfather's big house in a small town outside of Guadalajara, Mexico. It was a full house, my uncles, my cousins, all of us crammed together under one roof. Despite having many warm, happy moments, that house also had dark corners that could make your skin crawl. But I experienced many joyful things there too. One of my greatest joys was a rag doll I received for my 7th birthday. She had a pink dress made of thick cotton fabric and big eyes embroidered with black thread. I could tell the doll was old, but to me, she was beautiful. My mother, on the other hand, hated her. She always said those kinds of dolls gave her the creeps, and every time she saw me playing with my doll, she'd scold me. One night, I wanted to sleep with my little doll, but I heard my mother's footsteps coming down the hallway. To avoid getting in trouble, I grabbed the doll and threw her up toward a high wooden shelf above the old television in my room. The doll spun through the air and landed hanging from one arm, her body tilted at an odd angle with her head falling to one side. I didn't dare climb up to get her down that night. I was too afraid my mother would see me. The next morning, I didn't touch her either. I got up and went to have breakfast with everyone else. We were all sitting around the table when my father, who had a terrible temper, accidentally knocked his plate to the floor. My grandmother scolded him harshly. Angry and embarrassed, he stood up and stormed off to my bedroom, where my little doll was still hanging. Not much time passed before we heard a loud scream, like someone had been terrified. My father came running out, pale as a sheet, his eyes wide and his breathing heavy. We all jumped up immediately. "The doll screamed," he shouted. "I saw her crawling from the bed and climbing up to the shelf by herself. She hung herself up there." My blood ran cold. He wasn't a man who scared easily, but he was trembling like a child. We all went to the room together, and there she was, the doll, hanging from the exact same arm in the exact same position where I'd left her the night before. My father spent the entire day talking about it, insisting that the doll had something evil inside her. The worst part was that 2 days later, my little doll disappeared. We searched the entire house. She wasn't on the shelf, under the bed, or in any of the drawers. I thought maybe my mother or father had thrown her away, but my mother swore she hadn't even touched her. Then one day, my mother went to the back room to put away some laundry and found the doll lying on the floor. My mother called me over, frightened, and said she had already swept that room, and the doll definitely hadn't been there before. She picked up the doll with a plastic bag, and they threw her away immediately. But when I got older, I learned exactly how they disposed of her. My family tells the story that they tried to burn her, but she wouldn't catch fire, not even with rubbing alcohol. That same night, they put her in a black garbage bag, tied it shut with duct tape, and buried her far away in an empty lot on the other side of town. My little doll never appeared again. I don't know what was happening with that doll, but something dark was definitely living inside her. Maybe it was the spirit of a child who had loved her before, or maybe it was something else entirely, something that fed on the love and innocence of children. All I know is that even now, as an adult, I can't look at old dolls without remembering those black embroidered eyes and the way she hung there, like she was watching us, waiting for the right moment to move again. Some toys, I've learned, never really stop playing. They just wait for the next child to love them, and then the game begins all over again. My name is Angela Ramos Lopez. I'm 42 years old, and I'm originally from San Miguel del Progreso, a small town nestled between mountains in northern New Mexico, about 2 hours from Santa Fe if the roads aren't blocked by rock slides. This is where I was born, where I got married, and where I've been taking care of our small farm alone for the past 5 years. Ever since my husband Marcus went to work in the maquiladoras in Tijuana. He sends what he can. It's not much, but it covers the necessities: corn, soap, some medicine, and when we're lucky, internet that I share with a neighbor. Our farm is tiny, barely 2 acres on land that my husband inherited from his father. We have corn, a few rows of beans and serrano peppers, 1 skinny cow, 3 hens, and 2 old turkeys that are no longer good for selling. I do everything myself, irrigating at dawn, harvesting. My dog keeps me company, a mixed breed with short hair called Tiger, though he doesn't even bite anymore. Everything was normal, or as normal as life can be here, until one day in March when I started feeling something strange. Not exactly fear, but an uneasiness, a sensation as if someone was watching me. It was a Wednesday, I remember, because there was a crescent moon. I was drawing water from the well with the pulley when I caught sight of something in the desert, over where the hills begin that border the Hernandez family's chili fields, a very still figure. I thought it was a dead tree, but then I noticed it hadn't been there the previous afternoon. I stared at it for a few seconds, and it moved. It didn't walk, it just disappeared, as if it had crouched down or slipped between the bushes. I didn't pay much attention to it. I thought it might be some neighbor passing through their land. Around here, people sometimes take shortcuts wherever they can. But the next day, at the same time, I saw it again. It was someone, I'm sure of that. They were about 300 feet away, standing behind a large mesquite tree that grows beside a white rock. They weren't doing anything, just standing there with a cap or hat. I couldn't see clearly, but I knew they were watching me. A chill ran through me. I whistled for Tiger to bark, but the dog didn't move. He just lay there as if he hadn't noticed anything. That made me more nervous. On the third day, it was no longer a coincidence. At 5:30 in the afternoon, when the shadow of the cornfield falls right over the wooden fence, there they were again, always in the same place, always silent, just watching. That night I told my sister Rosario, who lives 20 minutes away on foot. She told me not to worry, that it could be someone from town who was mentally ill or some cattle thief seeing what they could steal. She offered to come sleep with me for a few days, but I said it wasn't necessary. I don't know why, but deep down I didn't feel that figure was a threat, just that it was waiting for something. I started keeping the kerosene lamp lit all night, just in case. I slept with the machete beside my bed and a small radio that Marcus had given me. Every morning I went out to check for footprints, but the ground was dry and there were no marks, as if no one had stepped on the earth. The day things changed was a Saturday. I had gone to town early to sell some eggs and drop off a letter for Marcus at the internet kiosk. I returned before noon. When I crossed the barbed wire fence that surrounds the farm, I noticed that one of the chicken coop doors was open. Not broken, not forced, just open. The chickens were still there, nothing was missing, but I never leave those doors open, not even by accident. I approached and checked everything. The only strange thing was a sprig of sage placed right in the center, on top of the feeding trough. There was no wind to blow it from the roof. Someone had put it there. That night I felt real fear for the first time, not because of what might happen, but because of not knowing what was happening. I sent Marcus a message, but he didn't answer. Signal only comes once a day, and sometimes it's delayed. I locked myself in, something I almost never do because around here, danger always comes from outside, from the desert, not from people. The next day, when I went to see if the watcher was in their place, I didn't see them. But when I approached the spot where they always stood, the mesquite with the white rock, I found something nailed to the trunk. An old religious card, like the ones they put on prayer candles. It was St. Jude Thaddeus. It was damp from the dew, but someone had placed it there carefully, stuck with a rusty nail. I took it down and kept it. I felt bad leaving it there, but I was also afraid of what it meant. I realized then that whoever was watching me knew I had noticed them. The following weeks, everything became stranger. I started finding small things around the house, a shirt button on the gate, a crushed cigarette on the grinding stone, a gray rag hanging from the lime tree. None of these things were mine, but they weren't trash either. They were placed there, as if someone was leaving me signals. One early morning I was awakened by the sound of a long, sharp whistle, repeated 3 times, like the ones men used to make before to signal they were coming through the desert. I looked out, but saw no one. The dog kept sleeping. I thought about waking Rosario, but I didn't want to worry her unnecessarily. The last straw came when one morning, upon opening the patio door, I found a folded photograph on top of the wooden box where I keep the seeds. It was a photo printed on matte paper, old, showing a group of 5 people sitting in a circle in a desert clearing. They looked blurry, as if the camera was very poor, but one of them had a shirt exactly like Marcus's. Exactly the same brand, the same checkered pattern. I recognized it because I had put it in his suitcase when he left, but it couldn't be him. He was in Tijuana. What was a photo like that doing on my land? I couldn't take it anymore. I went to the county agricultural office. I told them part of what was happening. The supervisor looked at me with pity. He told me that sometimes when you live so alone, you imagine things, that it could be some crazy person from the hills or a drunk, that I should pray and be careful not to go looking for explanations. One day before the rain started, I decided to go up alone to the hill where the watcher always appeared. I did it on instinct, not out of bravery. I took my machete, water, and a rosary that I hung around my neck. I climbed slowly. I reached the mesquite and checked the place. Nothing. But a little higher up among the bushes, I found a shack made of branches, hidden among the rocks. It wasn't a house, it was a rustic shelter, small, like someone who didn't want to be found. Inside there was a torn blanket, several empty cans, an old notebook, and a folded newspaper with an underlined news item. Agricultural worker found dead in irrigation canal in Mexicali, unidentified, with signs of violence. Believed to be one of the missing migrant workers. It was from 4 months ago. My legs trembled. I took the notebook. It didn't have many pages, just scattered phrases. One said, I couldn't warn her. Another, they didn't see me leave. And on the last page, she knows I'm here. That night I cried like I hadn't cried in years. I didn't understand if the man watching me was my husband, if he had returned without warning, if he had escaped from something, if it was him living there without approaching, or if someone else was impersonating him, watching him, knew about him. I never saw the figure again after that. Weeks passed, the desert filled with rain, the roads became muddy. Rumors started in town that they had found someone's remains over by the arroyos. Nobody mentioned names, but a retired police officer came looking for me one day. He asked if I knew a certain Marcus Ramos. I told him the truth, he's my husband. He told me I should prepare myself, that maybe in a few days they would call me to do DNA tests. I'm still waiting. Since then, every afternoon I sit and look toward the hill, toward the mesquite, toward the white rock. I no longer expect to see the watcher, but I can't stop thinking that someone, something, came to make sure I knew the truth. Maybe not the complete truth, maybe just a part, but enough. Today the farm remains the same. The corn grows, the chickens cluck, and I'm still alone, with the notebook hidden among the grain sacks and the now wrinkled photograph inside the Bible. And every time I hear a whistle in the distance, I stop, because there are things that never really leave. They just stay there, watching from behind the hills, waiting for you to understand what they never dared to say. My name is Jesus Abelino, but everyone knows me as Chai. I was born in a rural community called San Nicolas del Gavilan in southern Colorado, heading toward the foothills where the mountains begin to mix with the red earth. I'm 27 years old, and for as long as I can remember, I've worked the land. Without much schooling, life taught me to read the soil, to know when it would rain by the color of the sky, and to not stick my nose where it doesn't belong. 3 years ago, I accepted a job at a ranch that wasn't mine or anyone else's from town. A ranch that people avoided like it brought bad luck. It was there I learned that sometimes the earth also keeps secrets, and not everything that grows in the field can be harvested. This story I'm about to tell has no ghosts or things that move by themselves. What there is people with things to hide, places sealed so the truth can't get in, and silences that weigh more than work. It all began in 2022, at the end of July. The corn and chili harvest season had ended, and I was looking for work. A neighbor, Don Rodolfo, told me that someone he knew was looking for people to work on a ranch further north, near San Juan del Rio, in an area they called Padres Canyon. It was an old, large ranch that had been abandoned for years, and now someone had bought it to get it running again. They paid well, $500 a week with food and lodging. For us, that was a lot. I didn't ask any more questions. I went in a pickup truck along with two other guys, Ismail and Tabo, who became my buddies during the first month. The ranch was called El Rabaldo, the Oak Grove. It was tucked between the hills, with dirt roads that closed off when it rained. When we arrived, the first thing we saw was an old brick wall, a large tile-roofed house in the back, a half-fallen corral, and an enormous warehouse separated from the rest with rusty metal doors. We were received by a man about 50 years old, thin, with polished boots and a white hat. He called himself the engineer, but never gave his full name. "We're just here to work," he told us from the start. "Don't get involved in what doesn't concern you. I pay on time and I don't like questions." The tone was polite but firm. Nobody replied. During the first few weeks, everything was normal. We cleaned the corral, fixed fences, weeded the area around the main house. But the old warehouse, which was about 200 feet separated from the house, was always locked with a chain, and the engineer wouldn't let us even approach it. He said they kept old things there that were no good. After 2 months, one day he arrived and called me aside. "You look more serious, Chai. Would you be up for cleaning the warehouse?" I accepted without thinking. It was work, and if he had chosen me alone, it was for something. He gave me the key to the chain. It was a thick, old key, like one for a safe. When I opened the padlock and pushed the doors, the musty smell hit me hard. It smelled of humidity, old earth, metal, and something else, something rancid. The warehouse was bigger than I had imagined. It had broken boxes, rusty tools, dry fertilizer sacks, and old furniture covered by tarps. I started taking things out little by little. There were rats, spiders, and bats sleeping in the beams. The place was full of dust and cobwebs. I spent 2 full days cleaning. On the 3rd day, while pushing an old wardrobe against one of the back walls, I noticed something strange, a line in the wall, like a poorly painted division. I knocked with my knuckles. It sounded hollow. I crouched down and started removing the dust. With a crowbar that Tabo lent me, I forced the corner. The board gave way. Behind it was a small metal door, like a walk-in freezer, with 3 thick chains crossed from the inside. That's when a doubt I couldn't shake entered my mind. Who locks themselves inside with 3 chains? I stood there staring at it for long minutes. I didn't want to tell the engineer for fear he'd fire me. I also didn't want to mention it to Ismail and Tabo in case it caused trouble. That night, I couldn't sleep well. The next day, I pretended to keep cleaning boxes. Meanwhile, I went back to the door. With my cell phone flashlight, I crouched and looked through a rusty crack. Inside, there was something. First, I saw black bags piled up, the kind we use for trash, but big ones, like those used to store animal remains. I also saw a metal chair lying on its side and a pair of handcuffs hanging from a beam. My stomach lurched. I went for the crowbar. I didn't think anymore. It took me more than an hour to cut the chains that were almost fused with rust. The metal creaked. I cut my hand, but I opened it. Inside was a concrete room with no windows. The air was unbreathable. Everything stank of confinement. The The black bags piled up were covered with dust, and when I touched one, I felt something hard, elongated, with human shape. I didn't need to open it, I knew what it was. But the worst wasn't that. What broke me was seeing in a corner a spiral notebook stained with mold, open, with large, trembling letters written with marker. They didn't let me leave. I've been here since October. My name is Monica. And below, with smaller letters, repeated several times. I can still hear them laughing. I fell backward. I felt as if they had dumped a bucket of cold water on my chest. I left the warehouse trembling. I washed my hands until they were raw. I sat alone by the well, thinking about what to do. If I spoke up, I'd put myself in the crosshairs. If I stayed quiet, I'd become an accomplice. That same night, I pretended to be sick. I told the engineer my stomach hurt. He gave me permission to leave for a few days, but I didn't come back. I went to Denver, to my aunt's house. There I worked up the courage to make an anonymous report. I didn't give my name or details that would connect me to it. I just said what I saw. I gave the ranch's coordinates. I don't know if anyone did anything. Months passed. One day in November, I returned to town. I saw Ismail at the plaza. He told me the ranch had been evacuated, that one early morning, several black SUVs with covered plates had arrived, gone in, and taken everything away. They gave the workers money and told them to get lost. They say they found strange things in the warehouse, he told me, but nobody says more. Since then, El Rabaldo Ranch has been empty again. Now, it's surrounded by new fencing with cameras at the corners. Nobody approaches. I'm still working in the fields. I farm on borrowed land with my head held high. But that warehouse won't leave me alone. It taught me that there are places used to hide things nobody wants to find, and that those who pay well almost always expect your silence, not your work. If someone ever offers you work at a lonely ranch, far from everything, look carefully before accepting. Sometimes what looks like abandonment is just the facade of something worse. And if you see a door sealed from the inside, think twice before opening it. Jesus Chai Abelino, farm worker, witness, and still with a clear conscience. My name is Justino Reyes, and this story is mine, though it costs me to tell it. I was born in the foothills of Arizona, on a ranch that doesn't even appear on maps anymore. It's between Tucson and a little town called Los Bancos, in an area where the earth is red, corn grows poorly, and the trails are marked more by mules than by authorities. My father, Don Dorodio, was a man of the land until his sight failed him. He worked with a machete from childhood, took care of goats, planted without a tractor, and lived without electricity. When he died 3 years ago, he left me a forgotten plot. About 7 acres on the slope of Rattlesnake Hill, where they say in the 70s, revolutionaries used to hide. My older brother Naber said, nothing but hard ground and rattlesnakes. But I felt drawn to go there, as if it were my duty. So with my own savings, I bought an old mule, a wheelbarrow, and a backpack sprayer for herbicide. I also took a tarp, some blankets, machetes, and the stubborn idea of raising a decent crop in that forgotten corner. I arrived for the first time on a Monday at 6 in the morning. It was still dark. I left my wheelbarrow under a cottonwood tree, set up my camp next to a large claw-shaped rock, and started clearing. Dead brush, roots, stones. It took me 3 days just removing dead grass. The earth was strange, not bad, but it had hard patches, as if underneath there were large stones or layers that hadn't moved in years. Even so, I persisted, through furrows, cleaned with the hoe, pulled out buckets of packed earth. It was on the fourth day that I found the first strange thing. While digging near a dead tree, I felt the hoe strike something metallic. It wasn't the sound of a stone, but a sharp clank. I dug deeper and pulled out what looked like a piece of rusty sheet metal. It was buried carefully, not thrown randomly. Under the sheet metal was a broken burlap bag, damp. Inside, I found remains of a military shirt, torn by the years, and an old cartridge. It wasn't for hunting. It was heavy caliber, the kind you don't see in the field except when there's trouble. I thought someone might have buried it there decades ago. The old-timers said that in those hills, rebels had hidden people from the resistance movements, or others. But it wasn't history you took seriously, just campfire stories. I didn't say anything. I kept working. The next day, further down, I found a different trace. It was a circle of stones surrounded by old charcoal, as if it had been a well-made fire pit with stones arranged with intention. But it wasn't recent. The stones were covered with earth. When I dug, I found pieces of rusted sardine cans, but intact. I also found a broken bottle of oral serum, the kind used in rural clinics. What was all that doing in the middle of an abandoned plot? I started paying closer attention. On a nearby tree, a twisted live oak, I noticed some old cuts. They weren't natural, they were marks, 3 horizontal lines and 1 vertical crossing them, as if someone had been keeping count of something. Further on, I found another stone painted with something like charcoal mixed with lime. A sideways cross. I don't like getting involved in things I don't understand, but there was something in the air that made me uncomfortable. It no longer felt like just earth and work. I felt as if someone was watching me among the trees, as if the field didn't want to be disturbed. Still, I continued, but things didn't stop there. One Saturday at noon, while cleaning a natural berm, the hoe brought up something that looked like a tarp. I thought it was old trash. When I pulled it, a bundle came out bigger than expected. I moved away. It was a large sack tied with rope. It weighed quite a bit. When I opened it, I almost vomited. It wasn't a body, but it had been one. Human remains, an incomplete skull, ribs, pieces of shirt mixed with bone. Among the remains, a metal cross with a barely visible inscription. Jose S. and the number 1996. I sat frozen. I didn't scream, didn't run, I just sat in the shade of the cottonwood and stared at the ground. All I could think was, what do I do now? It was too late to back down, so I forced myself to stay calm. I covered the hole again with branches and stones. I took photos with my cell phone, but didn't send them to anyone. I spent the night on the ranch with my machete beside me. I heard noises, footsteps maybe, sometimes like someone kicking leaves a few feet away. I didn't see anyone, but I didn't sleep a wink. The next day I went down to town. I went to see Don Agustin, an old cooperative member who knows the mountains better than anyone. I told him what I had found, carefully. He listened in silence. When I finished, he said, "Justino, if you've already moved what was buried, you're inside now. That land won't give you anything good." "Who buried it?" I asked. "That's not something you ask around here. Look, years ago that mountain was used for things none of us knew well. Camps, training, settling scores. If you think you can plant on top of that, go ahead and plant." But remember that the earth keeps things. It doesn't give them up easy. I didn't believe everything he said, but I didn't ignore it either. I went to the county sheriff, showed him the photos. He asked me not to say anything to avoid stirring up dust, that if I wanted to file a report, I should do it in Phoenix, but he wasn't going to get involved. He told me that if I wanted to keep working that land, it was at my own risk. I stayed away for a few days. Then I tried again, but everything changed. Tools appeared moved in the morning. My camp tarp was found torn. One day I found a cigarette stub in the middle of my coffee pot. I don't smoke. One afternoon I saw two thin, shirtless men going up the opposite trail. They weren't armed, but they weren't carrying tools either. They looked at me without greeting. They just continued their path as if they knew I was in the wrong place. That night I slept in the truck. At dawn I left. Since then I haven't touched that plot. I spent months without saying anything. I was afraid they'd come to silence me. I changed my route. I dedicated myself to another part of the family land, closer to the river. But sometimes, when the wind blows from Rattlesnake Hill, it brings a strange smell, old smoke, dry grease, gunpowder that no longer burns. The crop never sprouted. That land is dead. And I understood, though late, that not everything you inherit gets worked. Sometimes you inherit silences. You inherit stories that were buried for a reason. And if you stir them up with your hoe, the only thing you harvest is danger. My name is Lionel Hernandez. I'm 49 years old, father of 2 children, and I've worked in agriculture my entire life. I'm originally from Yaco del Cafe, a town nestled in the mountains of central Puerto Rico, where the aroma of coffee isn't a trend but a heritage. My parents and grandparents picked coffee on these lands. I learned to carry sacks from age 8, to read the weather just by looking at the sky, to distinguish good beans just by touch. I work on a plantation called El Paraíso, Paradise, though the name often doesn't fit. It's an old, extensive plantation, the kind passed down from generation to generation, but one that stopped generating the profits of yesteryear long ago. Lately, the owner has been renting part of the land to new companies that claim to make specialty coffees. We handle the hard part, the picking, the hulling, the loading. I don't complain, it's honest work. Until recently, the strangest thing that had happened to me in the coffee groves was running into a coral snake. But what I'm about to tell you isn't about snakes or ghosts. It's something more real, dirtier, and harder to explain. It all began in mid-November of 2023, when we started the harvest in the upper part of the plantation, an area we call the ravine, because it's next to a deep, half-hidden creek. We almost never use that part. The trees grow too close together, and it's hard to get in with the sacks. But that year, out of necessity, the boss sent us there. On the first day, while I was weeding near some large, old coffee trees, I found a wallet thrown among the branches. It was dirty, wet. I opened it thinking it belonged to one of the workers, but it wasn't from anyone I knew. A certain Jesus Almos Ramirez from Cordoba, Puerto Rico. The driver's license was expired. It also had 2 $50 bills, a debit card, and a small school photo of a child. I thought about taking it to the boss, but something didn't add up. What was that wallet doing there in the middle of the wilderness? It wasn't a transit zone. To get there, you have to squeeze between dense coffee trees, cross a creek, and climb a small hill. I kept it in my bag, and didn't say anything. 2 days later, in the same sector, I found a cell phone. It was an old model with a cracked screen, but when I pressed the side button, it turned on for a second and showed the wallpaper, a woman in nurse's uniform. Then it died. It had no chip. By then I was starting to worry. What were these things doing there? I thought about thieves, people fleeing from something, or even someone using that area as a hideout. But I couldn't shake the doubt. So that weekend, instead of going to the market as usual, I returned alone to the ravine early with a backpack and a machete. I crossed the creek, followed the path between the coffee trees, and started searching. I was guided by intuition, moved branches, loose earth, places where the grass seemed flattened. That's when I found the first hole. It was behind a tall coffee tree near a mossy rock. It was a small cavity, about 2 feet deep, covered with leaves. When I removed the cover, I saw a black bag tied with rope. I pulled it out carefully. Inside was another wallet with an ID in the name of Claudia Gomez from Orizaba, some women's glasses, a torn, stained blouse, a car key, and a lock of hair tied with a blue rubber band. I had to sit down. I couldn't breathe for a few seconds. That was no longer lost objects, it was concealment. I thought about going to the police, but let's be honest, around here the police arrive late or not at all, and when they do, sometimes it's worse. So I decided to follow the trail on my own. I don't know if out of stubbornness, or because I felt that if I didn't do something, nobody would. I spent entire weeks returning to the place in secret. I'd go early or at dusk when nobody was at the plantation. I marked in a notebook the points where I found things: shoes, purses, papers, a hospital identification bracelet, and more cell phones, all covered, hidden among the coffee trees, as if someone wanted to bury them without leaving a trace. By January of 2024, I had 11 points marked, and there was a pattern. They were all in a line, as if following a route that descended from the secondary road that goes from Yaco to San Antonio Limon, and entered through a trail that not even we coffee workers use. One Sunday, I decided to follow that complete route. I left with a flashlight, machete, and water. I climbed from the ravine and advanced following the imaginary line of the findings. After almost 2 hours, I reached a wooded area that was no longer a coffee plantation. It was closed forest with tall trees and dense humidity. There, I found something I still struggle to describe, a kind of shelter. It wasn't a house or a campsite. It was a hole in the earth, reinforced with wood, covered by branches. Inside was a blue tarp, stacked sacks, water bottles, food cans, torn papers, and on a stone, a metal box closed with a padlock. I didn't try to force it. My hands were trembling. But I did take photos with my cell phone. When I crouched to see better, I heard a crack, as if something or someone had stepped on a branch. I got up quickly. The forest was in that silence that squeezes your ears. I didn't see anyone, but I knew I was no longer alone. I left the way I came. That night I couldn't sleep well. The next day, when I went to the plantation as usual, I met a new man. He wasn't a day laborer. He wore clean boots, stain-free jeans, a checkered shirt, and a black cap. He was talking to the boss, but he looked at me as if he knew me. He greeted me with a very fake smile. "You're Don Leonel, right? They recommended I talk to you about the coffee here. I want to learn." I didn't answer him, but his presence left me uneasy. That same day, when I returned home, my wife told me that 2 men had passed by asking about me. They said they were from the government, that they were doing an agricultural survey, but they didn't ask anything about farming. They asked if I went out to the mountains a lot, if I had seen strange things. She told them she didn't know anything. That's when I knew I could no longer continue alone. I kept everything I had collected in a metal box that I hid in the chicken coop. I contacted a friend who lives in Ponce and who worked for years in civil protection. I told him everything. He believed me. He told me it sounded like a human trafficking network or something similar, that the area had been used for years by groups that move migrants, women, even organs. I didn't want to believe it at first, but when he told me that in Mayaguez there were at least 5 reports of missing persons whose belongings matched what I had found, I no longer doubted. I gave him the photos. He passed them to a journalist in San Juan. They said they would investigate, but until today, nothing has come out in the media, and the men with caps keep appearing. One followed me to the entrance of town a month ago. Another stayed watching from a black truck parked in front of the store. I no longer return alone to the ravine, but every day I pick coffee, I look at the ground among the coffee trees, hoping to find another object. Something someone dropped in the middle of fear, something that tells me there's still someone alive waiting for help. I keep writing in my notebook. I keep hiding everything I collect. I don't know how long I'll be able to, but what I can assure you is this. Among the coffee trees, it's not just coffee that grows. There are also secrets that nobody wants to see. And if someday you come across an old wallet, a torn photo, a child's shoe among the wet earth, don't look the other way. Because here in the mountains of Puerto Rico, what gets buried isn't always dead. My name is Don Alicio Morales. I was born in El Triunfo, a remote settlement tucked in the Cascade Mountains of Washington State, about 4 hours from Spokane. I'm 68 years old, and since I became a widower 11 years ago, I've lived alone on my small farm. My children have already left. One is in Tacoma, drives a dump truck. The other lives in Portland and works in a garage. They come once a year, if that. I've gotten used to it. My life is simple. I get up at 5, light the stove, make coffee, heat up some eggs, and go out to check on the animals. I have about 12 chickens, a rooster, 2 skinny pigs, and a small field where I grow corn and pumpkins. Just enough for me. No luxuries, but with what's necessary. I get water from a mountain spring through a black tube I installed myself years ago. Electricity, when it comes, is from an old solar panel that sometimes fails. What I'm about to tell you happened last year, between June and September, during the heavy rain season. At first, I thought it was a bad joke or some forest animal, but over time, I realized it was something more. Something that in the end forced me to see the world with different eyes. It all started with a chicken that disappeared. One of the white ones, the noisiest. I didn't see feathers. There was no commotion, nothing. I thought maybe some raccoon had taken it. It wouldn't be strange. Or a coyote. I checked the coop thoroughly and reinforced the wire mesh. But a week later, another one disappeared. And this one did leave feathers, but outside the corral, not inside. That didn't make sense to me. I thought about a coyote, though it's been years since they've come down this far. I set up a motion sensor lamp next to the coop. The next night, no chicken disappeared, but half a sack of corn went missing. The one I kept inside the shed next to the storage room. I had opened it and put plastic over it as always, but it dawned half empty, with the sack folded again. That's when I started to suspect. It was no longer an animal. An animal doesn't fold plastic or put things back so carefully. I went to see Don Lucio, who lives further down, about a mile by horse trail. Have you seen anyone strange around here? I'm missing chickens and corn, maybe some traveler, someone who got lost and comes back every week. Well, who knows? But we're not in times to trust shadows anymore. Strange people have been passing through these mountains, folks running away, hiding. I've heard it on the community radio. Strangers, migrants, criminals escaping to the forest. He was right. Although this mountain range is peaceful, things have happened. People going up fleeing, hiding. I started sleeping with my shotgun unloaded next to the bed, not to shoot, but so whoever came in would see I wasn't as alone as I seemed. 3 weeks passed, and one night the motion sensor on the coupe lamp activated. I woke up from the light filtering through the window. I got up without making noise and went out with the flashlight off. I didn't see anyone, but the chicken coop was open. The door wasn't forced, it was slid carefully. One less chicken. The next day I searched the forest. I looked for broken branches, marks, trash, nothing. Until going up along the edge of the old coffee grove, among the humidity and moss, I noticed something out of place. Some large banana leaves placed like an improvised roof over a hole in the ground. It was a small shelter, hidden among rocks. I approached cautiously. Inside was a dry space, just big enough to lie down, a plastic bottle, a bag with stale tortillas, and an old notebook. Nobody was there, but it was clear someone lived there. I didn't sleep well that night. For days nothing happened. I thought he had left, but then another chicken disappeared, and an old knife I had hanging behind the wash basin. Then I decided to leave something, not a trap, something different. I put a sack with corn, but inside I put a sheet of paper. I wrote, "If you're hungry, ask. Don't hide, I'm not your enemy." I left it there in plain sight. The next day the sack was still there, but the note had a response. There was another sheet written in pencil. "I can't ask, I don't trust, I don't want to cause harm, just passing through. I'll leave soon." I felt something in my chest I can't explain. It wasn't fear, it was something else, a mix of curiosity and pity. I had trouble imagining someone living like that, in silence, taking only what was necessary. Because that was true, he never stole more than he needed. I wrote again. I left bread, instant coffee, a hand-crank flashlight. It's not charity, it's respect. Tell me if you need help. A week later I saw him. It was at dawn when I was going up through the coffee grove. I saw a shape moving among the trees. I hid and waited. It was a young man, thin, long hair, dirty but not torn clothes, black eyes, alert like a deer's. He carried my knife on his belt and the corn sack over his shoulder. When he saw me, he froze. "I'm not going to hurt you," I said without moving. "I just want to know who you are." He didn't answer. "You didn't steal from me, you just took what you needed to continue." "I didn't want to," he said in a low voice. "I was just passing through." "Where are you coming from?" "From the north." "And where are you going, where they won't find me?" We stood there looking at each other. I offered him coffee. He said he couldn't stay. I asked if they were looking for him. He didn't answer, but from his look, his gesture, his fear, I knew they were. He wasn't a migrant or a thief. He was a boy running from something or someone. I didn't ask more. I told him that if he passed by again, he should ring the storage room bell. I left him a corner where he could sleep if he wanted. He never used it. He disappeared a few days later, but he left me one last note inside the notebook he had left behind. Thank you for not shouting. Thank you for not asking. Thank you for understanding. You are the only person who didn't look at me like a shadow. I never knew his name or his story. But even today, when evening falls and the birds go quiet, I look toward the forest and wonder, how many invisible people walk through our mountains? How many live hidden not out of malice, but out of fear? Since then, I no longer close the coop with a padlock. I just put a rope that's easy to remove. Because I learned that in the forest, there are those who have no home but still have dignity. And sometimes whoever steals a chicken isn't running from the law, but from forgetting. Welcome. Before I begin this account, I'd like to know where you're listening from and what time you prefer to hear these stories. Leave me your thoughts in the comments. Without further delay, let's begin. My name is Lewis Rivers. I'm a forest ranger at the Cascade Falls Natural Reserve, a mountainous area located in northern Oregon, near the Washington border. I've worked here for the past 12 years, patrolling on foot and by ATV the trails that wind through the old-growth forest, knowing every path, ravine, and creek bed like the back of my hand. My job isn't like what they show on television. I don't live in a wooden tower, and I don't spend my days watching for fires from a distance. I deal with poachers, irresponsible tourists, trash hidden in black bags among the underbrush, and all kinds of emergencies that only those of us who walk these mountains know how to handle. Every day is different, but if there's one thing I'm certain of, it's that in these hills, there are no secrets that can last long without being noticed. Or so I thought. Everything began to change last June during a routine patrol. I was assigned to cover a rarely traveled section of the northeast sector of the reserve. That area isn't open to the public. It was closed over a decade ago due to constant landslides, and because the trails became unsafe. There's no signage, no marked routes. In theory, no one should be wandering around there. That day, I started climbing along an old logging road that had almost been swallowed by moss and roots. I carried my backpack, my radio, and an old digital camera I used to document everything for reports. The weather was overcast, and the smell of moisture filled the air. Halfway up toward Thunder Ridge, at about 6,000 feet elevation, I noticed something strange, a recent mark in the ground, like thin tire tracks. They weren't from an ATV or a four-wheeler, more like a mountain bike with deep tread, recent. I crouched down to examine them. No more than 3 days old, I'd say. Who the hell is coming up here? I muttered to myself. A few yards further, I found the next clue. A cigarette butt, still whole, and an energy bar wrapper, imported brand, the kind you don't find in the nearby towns. I noted it in my logbook. It wasn't unusual to find trash, but no one had permission to be in that zone. I kept climbing, and an hour later, through the thickness of the forest, I saw it. A single-story wooden cabin with a rusted metal roof and old log walls. It wasn't collapsed or weathered by time. On the contrary, it was clean, maintained, with the grass around it cut short, and a neat stone pathway leading to the entrance. At first glance, it seemed abandoned, but the details told me otherwise. There was firewood stacked beside the entrance, covered with black plastic. The windows had new metal screening. There was a heavy padlock on the door the kind they sell at expensive hardware stores. And on the roof, a small solar panel. I stood there for a while without moving, observing. I approached from the right side and noticed that behind the cabin was an improvised water storage system made from plastic drums and PVC pipes. Whoever built this knew what they were doing. I took out my camera and shot several photos. Then I approached the door and knocked. No one answered. I waited 5 minutes. Nothing. I circled the cabin carefully. In the back, there was a small cleared area with a well-made fire pit covered with black river stones. There were no fresh ashes, but there were signs it had been used recently. A few yards away, I found definitive proof. An old boot with wet mud planted on a rock, as if someone had left it there to dry. It wasn't a work boot or hiking boot. It was military style, thick sole. Hanging from a nearby branch was a black thermal shirt, also freshly washed. I didn't know whether to wait for someone to return or if it was better to retreat. I chose the latter. I returned to headquarters with the photos and prepared a detailed report. I handed it to the station chief, Don Peterson, with whom I've shared years of work. He looked at me with a furrowed brow as he went through the photos one by one. "That cabin wouldn't be old Morrison's, would it?" he asked. "No, Morrison's cabin is in another sector, and it's been collapsed for 5 years. This one is maintained." He was silent for a while, thoughtful. Then he said something that made me uncomfortable. "Don't mention it to anyone else, okay? Let me see if there's anything in the old records, but for now, continue with your normal rounds." That's what I did, or at least I tried to. 2 weeks later, I returned to the place. This time I went up earlier, with the idea of finding some new clue or, with luck, the occupant. I brought my thermos, some pastries, and 2 flashlights in case evening caught me. When I arrived, it was past 11 in the morning. The cabin was different, not in structure, but in atmosphere. There were clear signs of recent presence, fresher footprints, marks in the grass, and most notably, a bicycle leaning against a tree. A mountain bike, Italian brand, expensive, with fresh mud on the tires. I approached very slowly. There was sound inside, not voices, but like movement, very slow footsteps dragging something. I knocked on the door once, then again. The sound stopped. I received no response. "I'm with the Forest Service," I said loudly in a firm tone. "I'm here to conduct a verification. This zone is outside authorized access. I need you to come out so I can identify you." Silence. I waited. When I was about to leave, the door opened just a few inches. From the other side, a low male voice said, "I'm just passing through. I'm not going to stay. I need your name and some identification." "I don't have any." "Are you camping here?" "No, I'm just checking on something." I didn't know how to respond. Something in his tone made me feel that he knew I couldn't force him to come out. He wasn't aggressive, but he wasn't scared either. It was as if he was already expecting me to arrive. "I'm going to file a report," I said finally. "This property isn't registered." The door closed slowly. I took more photos and left. That same afternoon, Don Peterson called me to his office. His brow was even more furrowed than the previous time. "Lewis," he said in a measured tone, "that cabin hasn't been on the maps since 2002. But there's something you should know." He opened an old drawer and pulled out a worn yellow folder. Inside were photocopies of reports with state government seals from the time when the area was less monitored. That cabin belonged to a family that disappeared in '99. They were known as the Hartmans. The father worked as a communications tower technician. The mother sold natural medicine. They went into that zone without permission and never returned. The only thing found was the cabin, burned from the inside. No one rebuilt it, or so we thought. I went cold. So someone rebuilt it without notice, or someone's been using it all this time without being seen. I asked for authorization to install a trail camera, the kind we use to monitor wildlife. He denied it. "Lewis, leave it alone. Don't patrol that sector anymore." I didn't like it, but I obeyed. 3 months passed. One December night, we received a call from the community of Pine Creek at the foot of the reserve. A local reported seeing a figure crossing the mountain with a red light near where I knew the cabin was. I went without notice. I climbed in the darkness, guiding myself with my flashlight. I didn't bring my radio. I walked in silence, only with my knife hanging from my belt. The cabin was there, but the bicycle was gone. There were no signs of fire, no footprints. I approached from the back and saw it, a wall completely opened, as if they had removed the entire thing. Inside, there were documents pinned with thumbtacks, old maps, annotations, names of unofficial trails. A sheet with a list of 3 dates. One of them coincided with the day I first climbed up. And in one corner, a word written in red marker, monitor. I left there with my pulse racing. I didn't take photos. I didn't want to leave a trace. The next day, the cabin was gone. Dismantled as if no one had ever lived there, as if they had taken it apart piece by piece. Today, I continue working at Cascade Falls. Don Peterson has retired. The new chief doesn't know anything about what happened, but I still keep the photos from that first time. Sometimes I look at them just to remind myself that the forest is also used by people who don't want to be found, and that there are places, even though they're within the map, where you don't have authority. Because sometimes you're not patrolling, you're being watched. After the cabin disappeared, I tried to let everything be. I continued with my routine, checking assigned sectors, filling out daily logs, and during breaks, I'd walk with newer colleagues through controlled routes. Nothing out of the ordinary. But it's not so easy to pretend you didn't see what you saw. I had the photos, not just of the cabin, but also of the interior. I reviewed them at home at night when my wife was already asleep. I studied them like criminal evidence. I focused especially on the maps hanging on that back wall. They weren't common topographical maps. They were old, printed on glossy paper, hand-marked routes with names that didn't appear on any official plan. Red Trail, Dry Channel, Detour 11A. And that term, monitor, that appeared 2 more times on other papers taped up. I tried searching for that word online, in forest surveillance forums, even in government archives. Nothing in that context made sense. I thought about talking to some contact from the environmental police, but I lacked evidence, and I didn't want to raise suspicions either. There's something you learn in this job. When someone does things in silence for years without getting caught, it's because they know more than you do. About a month later, in January, I was assigned to patrol Sector 6B, a low area much more accessible, right at the foot of the routes leading to Thunder Ridge. During a walk along a dry creek, I encountered a middle-aged man sitting on a rock. He wasn't carrying a backpack or equipment, just a navy blue jacket, beige pants, good boots, and a carved wooden walking stick. He didn't seem lost. I approached calmly. "Everything okay, sir?" "Yes, just resting," he replied without looking at me. "I've known this trail for years." "Do you have a permit? This area isn't open to the general public." He looked at me then. His eyes were very dark, and I don't know why, but I felt like he already knew me. Sometimes you don't need a permit. Sometimes you just need to not leave a trace. I didn't know what to say. He stood up slowly, adjusted his jacket, and asked me, "You're the one who went up to see the cabin, right?" I froze for a moment. I didn't confirm it, but I didn't deny it either. "What was that place?" I asked. "An observation point, but it's not there anymore because someone crossed the threshold." "What threshold?" "The one for those who know too much and can't return to ignorance." He left without saying more. He walked uphill along a route I knew, but that hadn't existed for years due to a landslide in 2006. Part of the hill came down, and it was never reopened. I walked behind him for about 20 yards just to verify I had seen him correctly, but the man was no longer there. Only the footprints in the wet earth, fresh, undeniable. The next day, I requested access to the park's physical archives, the ones kept under lock and key in storage, dating back to the reserve's opening in the 70s. It was a complicated task: forms, signatures, even calls to the state coordinator. But they authorized me with certain conditions. Don't take anything from the archive, don't make copies, don't take photos. I spent 3 days in the cold room, smelling dust and humidity. It was in an unmarked box, among unclassified papers, where I found something that made me stop cold. A report dated 1998, signed by someone from the previous Forest Surveillance Corps, now deceased. It said, during patrol in zone closed to public, a rustic construction of dwelling type was identified without cadastral registration, without evident agricultural use. Signs of recent occupation were observed. Entry was not made for security reasons. Presence of observers is reported. No intervention is reported. It is recommended not to return. Below that, a handwritten phrase: "The presence of the monitors is cyclical. Do not intervene. Do not investigate." There was the word again, monitors. I don't know what it really meant. I don't know if it was an internal code or something the old-timers invented to disguise what they couldn't explain. But that word had followed me for months, and now it was in the archives. Shortly after that, access to Sector 6B was restricted for maintenance. Nobody explained why. We just received a circular saying that internal routes should be closed for technical work. I knew it was something else. A week later, the forest surveillance drone we used to monitor logging and fire presence marked thermal activity exactly where the cabin had been. The coordinates were clear, but when we went up as a team to check, there was nothing. No trash, no footprints, no traces that a structure had ever been there. One of the new guys, a young man from Washington named Hugo, said to me quietly as we walked back, "Mr. Rivers, sometimes when I patrol alone on this side of the hill, I get the impression that someone's watching me, but there's never anyone there." "From where?" I asked. He pointed west. "From the ridge near the old tower. But that tower was completely removed 8 years ago. Since then, I haven't talked to anyone about the subject, but something changed in me. I no longer patrol the same way. I walk more slowly. I listen more. And there are nights when I go out to smoke on the porch of the house assigned to me at the forest station that I think I see a small red light blinking among the trees. as if someone were watching me from the mountain. I don't approach. I don't want to know if it's real. This isn't a story. It's not a legend. It's just a log I'm leaving here in case someday someone else finds the cabin. Or if any of you see maps with routes that aren't marked, or find a word written in red marker that shouldn't be in an official file. If you see something that seems deliberately hidden, it's probably not an error. Probably someone doesn't want you to know they're there. And if you see the word monitor, turn around. Don't ask questions. And above all, don't follow the path. My name is Saul Estrada. I've been a forest ranger for almost 16 years, and I'm currently assigned to Rocky Mountain National Park in Colorado. For many, this park is one of the best-kept secrets in the region, low-hanging mists that weave between the trees, giant peaks with names like Devil's Thumb and Eagle's Crest, and trails that seem invented by fairy tales. But you don't take care of a forest this long without realizing it also guards dark things. My job is almost always the same. Patrol authorized trails, check that visitors don't make fires in prohibited zones, verify that no one takes plants or animals, and sometimes rescue hikers who stray from the path. Since the pandemic, there have been more people on the mountain, but also more carelessness, more trash, and frankly, more accidents. What I'm about to tell you happened last October, right in the low season when the park empties out during weekdays, and the only ones roaming around are us conservation folks, biologists, and the occasional crazy loner who wants to connect with nature. It was a Tuesday. I remember it well because that day I went out alone to check the old Eagle Trail, a route that leads to the lookout but was closed years ago due to rock slides. Still, from time to time, we find people who ignore the signs and go in there, so it has to be walked occasionally. Everything was going normally. The day was cool with that thin mist that filters through the pines. I walked with my radio, my field notebook, a water bottle, and my knife hanging from my belt as always. It was then passing a sharp curve near an enormous oak tree, one with exposed roots like giant fingers, that something caught my attention. To the right of the trail, just where a steep descent begins, I noticed the earth was disturbed. It wasn't a burrow or a rock fall. It was a space of loose earth, as if someone had dug and then covered it in haste. I approached carefully. Something didn't feel right. I scraped a little with my knife, just a few inches. It was enough. There, half buried, was an arm. A human arm, already pale with decomposed skin, still with a black plastic bracelet on the wrist. I didn't scream. You don't scream when you find that. Your voice goes away. I backed away immediately and radioed the base. No one answered. It wasn't unusual in those zones, radio signal fails. So I took out my cell phone, climbed a few yards to catch signal, and called directly to one of my trusted colleagues, Tony, another ranger who'd been around for years too. I told him the basics. He said to wait there, not to touch anything else. I stayed quiet for almost half an hour, but Tony didn't arrive. Who arrived was someone else, a man I didn't know, park uniform, but without the badge or identification number. He came down the same trail as if he knew exactly where to go. "Are you Estrada?" he asked without introducing himself. "Yes, who told you?" "Tony sent me from coordination. There are protocols for this. Better if you don't say anything to anyone. We'll handle it." It sounded wrong from the first moment. "Aren't you going to call the police?" He looked at me for a long time. His answer was dry. It's not necessary. There's already knowledge of the case. It was just bad luck that you found it. That set off all my alarms. I told him it was mandatory to file a report and notify the district attorney's office as procedures indicate. He answered almost without emotion, "Don't do it, Saul. It's better for you." That's when I knew something was very wrong. That night I didn't sleep. I went home to the town, pretending normalcy, but as soon as daylight faded, I went back to thinking about the arm, the disturbed earth, and the empty stare of that guy who arrived before anyone else. I didn't want to talk to Tony inside. I already felt him implicated. I decided to do something I would question many times later. I returned to the site the next day without notice. I took another route, a less direct one that I'd known well since I was young, and we used to go camping in the canyons. I arrived at the oak past noon. The site was no longer the same. The earth had been covered with a layer of fallen leaves. Someone had removed the traces and placed a restricted access tape hanging between two branches, but nothing official. There were no investigation marks, no forensic work, nothing indicating that authorities had been there. That confirmed to me that they didn't want the discovery to be known. But the worst was yet to come. That night around 11:30, I received a call from an unknown number. I answered. No one spoke, just brief silence, and then a very low male voice said, "We're taking care of you, Saul. Don't ruin that." I hung up. My hands were shaking. I made sure to lock doors and windows well. I don't have family, I live alone, so if something happened to me, no one would know soon. I asked myself 1,000 times why I didn't call the police, why I didn't report the discovery to some media outlet. But the truth is I was scared. It wasn't just any fear. It was a fear installed in the back of my neck, as if I knew something bigger was moving behind it. During the following days, I pretended nothing was happening. I went back to patrolling, filling out daily reports, greeting visitors who wandered into the trails. But I paid closer attention to faces. I realized something that made my skin crawl. There were at least 3 more people with ranger uniforms who didn't belong to the park's real staff. They never talked much, moved alone, and didn't do rounds. They just watched. One afternoon, I ran into one at the old lookout cabin. He was smoking alone, looking toward the forest. I approached carefully. "Are you stationed at Mineral Base or in Denver?" I asked. He looked at me, took a long drag. "I'm not from either." "Then who sends you?" "You already know the answer, don't you?" That was all he said. He left. Almost a week later, an envelope arrived at my door. It had no return address. Inside was a printed photo. It was the bracelet from the arm I had seen, on a table, next to a manila folder with black letters that said Case 1283B Definitive Closure. Below that, a handwritten note. "You weren't looking for it. Don't forget it." I no longer knew what I was mixed up in. Secretly, I spoke with a contact I have in civil protection, someone who once helped me report illegal construction in a protected zone. I asked him to investigate if there were reports of recent disappearances in the area. He called me back 2 days later. "Saul, I'm telling you this in confidence. 4 months ago, a guy from Denver who came camping in the park disappeared. Nothing was ever known. His cell phone gave its last signal in the Eagle area, but officially they said he had left toward Denver, and the family insisted at first. Then they also disappeared from the process. The case was closed." He sent me the name, Louis Adrian M., 26 years old. I searched for the photo on social media. When I found it, I felt the blood drain from my body. The guy was wearing the same black bracelet on his wrist that I saw that morning. I don't know who killed him. I don't know if it was an accident, a settling of scores, or something else. But I do know that whoever did it doesn't want it known, and that there are people in the park with fake uniforms, fake names, who handle erasing traces. I decided to talk to a local journalist. I told him the basics, gave him copies of everything, told him I couldn't get directly involved, that the only thing I wanted was, if something happened to me, someone would know why. I didn't go back to the Oak, but since then, every time I go out to patrol, I watch carefully if they're following me, and I never use the same route 2 days in a row. What I found that morning wasn't an accident. It was a buried message. And every day that passes, I'm more convinced that the forest didn't want to hide it. It was just waiting for someone to find it. Several weeks passed in which everything seemed to calm down. The journalist I spoke with, a guy named Manuel Salinas, sent me a couple of messages saying he was reviewing everything, that he needed time to verify the data. He asked me not to look for him through other means, that he would contact me. I believed him, more out of necessity than trust. I continued with my rounds in the park, pretending normalcy, but I began to notice subtle changes. The routes that were previously assigned to other colleagues started being assigned to me, distant routes, areas that hadn't been traveled for years, with supposed reports of trash or fallen branches. Uninhabited places where signal doesn't enter, and you're left alone among the trees. One afternoon, they sent me to the North Sector, near Tecumseh Caves, to check a report of an abandoned campsite. I found nothing, but when I returned to base, one of the zone chiefs, who until then had never addressed me beyond the formal, called me aside. "Hey Saul, I got a kind of weird notice. Someone reported that you were snooping around in restricted zones. Everything okay?" I stayed quiet. I told him I didn't know what he was referring to. He just looked at me and gave me a pat on the shoulder. "Just don't get into where you're not called. Look, the mountains keep things that later we don't know how to explain." That phrase hasn't left me. A couple of nights later, around 3 in the morning, I heard a noise outside my house. I live on the outskirts of Estes Park, where the streets are stone and dogs alert to any movement. But that night, no dogs barked. I went out with a flashlight and saw a figure moving away among the shadows, without running, without hurrying. I didn't recognize him. The next morning, I found an envelope on the windshield of my truck. Inside was a single sheet folded in 4. It was an enlarged copy of an official ranger logbook. I recognized the format immediately. Name of person in charge, assigned route, observations. But what was underlined in red marker made a knot in my stomach. Internal log 30722. Zone, Oak Canyon. Observation, body recovery completed. External personnel present. Point relocated. Access closed temporarily. Signature, SC coordination. Those initials were mine, SC Saul Estrada. I hadn't signed anything. That's what disturbed me most. Someone was involving me as if they wanted that if something went wrong, it would look like I was part of it. It was no longer just about a discovery. It was a warning, a way of telling me you're already inside, whether you know it or not. I thought about leaving, resigning, moving, but at 45 years old, with years of public service, no direct family. Where was I going to go? Who was going to believe me without concrete evidence? And besides, I couldn't let this go without knowing what had really happened to that young man, Louis Adrian. It was then that Manuel, the journalist, contacted me again. He arranged to meet me at a cafe in Denver in a discreet place. He arrived with a folder and a face I didn't like at all. "I need you to see this," he said without greeting. He showed me a series of aerial photographs taken from a drone, according to what he explained. All from the zone where I found the arm. In one of them, dated a few days after the discovery, you could see a clear excavation about 6 feet long with 2 human figures beside it. Neither in visible uniform. In another, later one, the hole was already covered, but what made me frown was what was marked in red in one of the corners. A white van without plates with a long antenna mounted on the roof. That vehicle was tracked entering and leaving the park at least 3 times, all between midnight and 4 in the morning, Manuel said. It was never registered at the booth, and there's no official record of a technical visit. And what do you think they're doing? He looked at me seriously, more tired than anything else. I don't know yet, but they're covering something up, and it's not the first time. He told me he'd been investigating unreported disappearances in protected natural areas for 2 years. Places where people get lost without leaving a trace. And then the case gets closed for lack of evidence. And that on more than one occasion, indirect witnesses like me had reported finding remains, but ended up fired, silenced, or disappeared. He left me a copy of everything he had and asked me to stay in contact carefully. Nothing through networks, only calls in code or messages written on paper. I said yes, but deep down I felt something was going to break soon. I wasn't wrong. 2 weeks later, mid-morning, an official vehicle arrived at the park. It wasn't from the Department of Natural Resources or the Forest Service. It said Federal Environmental Surveillance, but it wasn't a common patrol. 2 men in suits with dark glasses got out, accompanied by a guy in olive green uniform that I didn't recognize. They asked to speak with me. They took me to the administrative office and interrogated me for almost an hour. Vague, repeated questions. Had I reported strange findings? Who had I talked to? Why did I return to the closed trail? They didn't accuse me, but they made it clear they knew everything. At one point, one of them said, "Sometimes excess curiosity complicates things, Estrada. And in this country, people disappear for less." I didn't know if it was a threat or advice. When they left a letter in my internal file, a supposed warning for noncompliance with safety protocols. Nothing more, but that was enough to fire me if they felt like it. Today, almost 5 months have passed since all that. I continue working in the park, but they changed my zone. I no longer patrol alone. There's always someone else, some new guy always in training who accompanies me. Most don't talk much, and I know they're not novices. The journalist Manuel stopped answering me 2 weeks ago. His last call was brief. He told me, "I'm going to publish something, but if something happens to me, make sure someone has what I gave you." I haven't heard from him since. Sometimes I think about the arm, the bracelet, the earth that seemed recently disturbed, and I can't help feeling that I'm standing on an invisible line where what's on this side is the park as everyone sees it, beautiful, peaceful, full of life. And on the other side, a network of buried secrets, carefully maintained by people with power. I don't know how much longer I can live caught in the middle, but I know something. If I disappear tomorrow, it wasn't because I got lost in the forest. It was because I found something the earth no longer wanted to swallow. My name is Esteban Andrade. I'm 24 years old and originally from Durango, Colorado. In 2023, after finishing my degree in environmental management, engineering at Colorado State University, I was assigned my internship at a forestry camp in the heart of the Rocky Mountains, about 3 hours inland from Steamboat Springs toward an area known as Wolf Mesa. There operated a surveillance station under the U.S. Forest Service, in charge of monitoring fires, protected wildlife, and illegal logging. When they offered it to me, I got excited. I've always loved the mountains, nature, the cold air of the peaks. I imagined 6 months full of hikes among pines, contact with animals, and real work. What I didn't imagine was running into a network that operates in the deepest parts of the country, invisible to everyone's eyes, using the very mountains as a shield. What I'm going to tell you is completely real. It's not supernatural. There are no ghosts or lights in the sky. There's something more disturbing, organized, silent, and absolutely ruthless people. My first day was at the end of April. I went up in a double traction truck with 2 other forest technicians, Don Aurelio, a veteran with more than 30 years in the mountains, and Ernesto, a young biologist who had already been in the area for 2 years. On the way, they explained basic things to me: how to use the radio, how to identify hot spots, what to do if I encountered aggressive wildlife. "What you should never do, kid," Don Aurelio told me as we descended a dusty trail, "is get into where you're not called. Here there are trails that don't appear on any map. There's noise in the mountains that doesn't come from animals. And if you ever see armed people, you turn around." I thought he was exaggerating. Narco-trafficking is something you know exists, of course, but I imagined it was far from forest life. I was wrong. The first weeks were calm. I slept in a cabin shared with Ernesto. We took turns doing rounds, checking trail cameras, and recording deer, cougar, and lynx activity. Most days we walked between 6 to 9 miles. The mountains are beautiful in that area. Giant pines, rivers of ice-cold water, and a clean silence that gives you peace. But soon I began to notice strange things. First were the distant shots. Some afternoons while we were in remote areas, isolated detonations could be heard. Don Aurelio said they were illegal hunters, and that we couldn't do anything if we didn't see them in the act. But the strange thing wasn't the sound, but the frequency. They were always at the same time and in the same areas, as if it were a pattern, not an accident. Then one night, returning to camp from a point called Deer Canyon, we found something that chilled my blood: a barbed wire zigzag, recently installed, cutting across the trail. It had no signage marks and didn't belong to the Forest Service. It curved around a ravine, and in the background you could see a dim light, like from a gas lamp, deep in the mountains. Don Aurelio saw it, stopped, and said, "We're not going that way. It's a hot zone." I tried to ask more, but he didn't respond. One morning, while we were checking a trail camera near Granite Point, I got ahead a few yards along a narrow trail. I got distracted taking a photo of what looked like a cougar track when I heard a metallic click, like a weapon being readied. I turned slowly. There was a man standing among the trees. He carried an assault rifle, tactical pants, and a cap without insignia. He wore no uniform, no badge, nothing that identified him. He stared at me without moving. He didn't seem to have any intention of shooting, but he didn't seem happy to see me either. "Good morning," I said. It was the only thing I could think of. "I'm with the Forest Service. Internship." He didn't answer. He just made a gesture with his head, indicating I should get lost. I retraced my steps. I ran into Ernesto, who was coming running when he heard the noise. I told him. He wasn't surprised. "There are people taking care of other things around this area, Esteban. They're not here for the animals." He explained to me what no one tells us in college, that many parts of the mountains, especially in the northern zone of Colorado, are controlled by armed groups that use the terrain to grow, hide weapons, or even set up laboratories. And they don't always disguise themselves. Sometimes they're there in broad daylight, like silent guardians of something we shouldn't see. The drop that spilled the glass happened in my 4th month, in July. Don Aurelio had gone out alone that week. I was supposed to relieve him, but when the day came, he didn't return to camp. Ernesto and I started to worry. We called by radio several times. Nothing. Finally, we went looking for him. We knew his last location was Devil's Canyon, a site where the Forest Service hadn't entered since 2018. When we got there, we found his backpack beside a dry creek. Inside were his radio, his field notebook, and his knife. Everything perfectly placed. There were no signs of struggle, just a note folded in 4, handwritten. "You're not taking care of animals, you're taking care of secrets. Don't get any closer." We never found his body. We never found him. We reported it, of course, but everything was handled coldly. The authorities told us he probably got disoriented or had an accident. No formal search was organized. Nobody went up to investigate. 2 weeks later, Ernesto requested his discharge and left. I finished the internship alone, with my heart in my throat every time I went to the field. I slept with a knife under the cot. I dreamed about the silhouette of the man with the camera, about the note in the backpack, about the trails that didn't appear on maps. I finished my service in October of 2023. I went down in a supply truck without making noise. I didn't say goodbye to anyone. I just wanted to get out. Until today, I haven't talked about this with anyone outside the field. I continue working in environmental issues, but from an office. I haven't stepped foot in the mountains again. I also haven't found a single official mention of what happens in that area. But if you're reading this and thinking about doing your internship in remote areas, do it. But stay alert. There are parts of the mountains where biologists don't rule, or rangers, or institutions, where they don't take care of wildlife, but something that shouldn't be seen. And those who take care of it don't wear uniforms or give explanations. Esteban Andrade, forest ranger for 6 months, survivor by luck. After coming down from the mountains, I thought I could leave everything behind. I acted like nothing happened. I finished my internship report, submitted my documents at the university, and returned home with my parents in Durango. They knew something had changed me, although they never asked directly. My mom would look at me strangely, cook for me without saying anything, as if she intuited that something had broken me up there. I tried to return to routine. I got a part-time job at a small environmental consulting firm, helping with impact assessments for urban developments. Everything was cleaner, more controlled. an office with air conditioning, instant coffee, and Excel sheets. But the nights gave me no respite. I dreamed about trails with no exit, about faceless men watching you from the pines, about trail cameras that returned images no one should have taken. What was most disturbing weren't the memories, but the feeling that they were still watching me. One afternoon near Christmas, I received a strange message on my cell phone. It was from an unknown number. It had no text, just a photo. The image showed the camp from the outside, the surveillance cabin, the water tank, the radio tower. There was fog, but I recognized it instantly. The strange thing was that in the image you could see a human silhouette standing right in front of the door, with their back turned, with a backpack that looked like Don Aurelio's. I responded. I blocked the number, but the unease stayed. Months passed. I forced myself to forget it. Sometimes I thought maybe I had imagined it all, that stress, isolation, the pressure of being in a remote area had made me exaggerate. But deep down I knew it wasn't true. And I confirmed it completely the day Arturo Lopez looked for me, a forest engineer who had done the same internship as me a year earlier. We met at an environmental job fair in Denver. He recognized me from my university badge and approached me. "Are you Esteban, the one who was at Wolf Mesa?" he asked. I told him yes. I was there too in 2022. They got me out before time. He looked at me directly. "You also saw the ones on the other side." I felt my stomach sink. He told me that once, while collecting soil samples near Eagle's Lookout, he ran into a concrete structure among the trees, camouflaged with branches. It wasn't a cabin or shelter. It was an underground entrance with industrial ventilation. Before he could get closer, he heard a warning shot in the air. He ran. He reported it. Days later, they reassigned him to another area without explanations. The mountains are full of places that don't appear on any map, and it's not just because of drugs, he told me. There are installations that aren't from narcos. They're from someone else. And those who take care of them don't identify themselves. That left me thinking. Weeks passed. I got encouraged to search in Reddit forums and closed Facebook groups about rural experiences in red zones. Most were nonsense, but I found 2 publications that chilled my blood. One of them talked about a communications base buried in the Colorado mountains, built in the 70s and abandoned after a project by the old Department of Communications. Supposedly, it was converted into a safeguard point for certain private projects of federal interest, without further detail. The other publication said that Wolf Mesa was a buffer zone, an area used not only for production, but to safeguard movements that shouldn't be detected by satellite. What I saw there, the erased cameras, the armed men who weren't hunting, the shots in sequence, began to take on new meaning. In April of the following year, I decided to return. Not to stay, but to see with my own eyes if something was still there. I asked a college friend, Martin, to accompany me. He knew the region well and had relatives in a nearby community, Candelaria, from where we could rent a mule and go up a trail that reached near the old camp. We planned the trip carefully. We brought GPS, cameras, provisions, nothing with drones or flashy technology. We were going discreetly. We went up at dawn. By noon, we reached an area known as Aspen Grove, less than a mile from the point where Don Aurelio disappeared. Martin was the first to notice there were new towers in the distance. On a hill that previously had nothing, Two metallic structures with antennas pointing toward the sky rose up. They weren't rural telecommunications. You could tell. There were also high-tension cables going down the slope, partially buried. We approached cautiously. There were no formal roads, but the footprints in the earth were recent. Boot prints, not hikers, at least 4 different pairs. We decided not to continue. We returned to Candelaria without telling anyone what we saw. Martin asked me not to mention it. He swore he would never go up again, and I haven't either. Today I work at an environmental NGO. I do field work, but in areas where people wave and share coffee, not where shots mark the clock. What I learned in the mountains doesn't have to do with pines or conservation. It has to do with the limits of the state, with the voids on the map, with secrets that hide in trails without names. It taught me that there are zones where you enter only once and leave, if you're lucky, with your mind loaded and your tongue tied by fear. That's why I write it here. Because if someday I disappear again, I don't want them to say it was an accident. I want them to remember that someone had already told it, and that in the Colorado mountains, not everything that's being taken care of walks on 4 legs. Esteban Android, ex-forest ranger, citizen as far as they let me. My name is Mariana Izquierdo. I was born in San Antonio, Texas, but for more than 10 years I've lived and worked in the Big Bend National Park Preserve in Texas. I'm a forest ranger. My job consists of patrolling the main trails, documenting flora and fauna, checking that there's no illegal logging, fires in prohibited zones, or poaching activities. I live alone in a wooden house assigned to me by the National Park Service. It's within the preserve perimeter, about an hour by ATV from the nearest community called Blue Stone. Sometimes other colleagues visit me, especially when there are biological counts or fire brigades, but most of the time I'm alone. I don't complain. I love this place. It's a dense forest, alive, always breathing. Here I've seen black bears, mountain lions on trail cameras, coyotes howling at dawn, and oak trees so tall they seem to hold up the sky. But there are also things that don't appear in the brochures, things that aren't talked about. It started last November. I noticed some strange marks on trees while doing an inspection on the Green Ridge Trail, a path we use little because it crosses a complicated rocky area. They were cuts in the bark of trees, small triangles carved into the wood with a knife. One every 30 yards or so. It wasn't graffiti or animal traces. It was intentional. I took them for what they seemed. Human signals. Maybe illegal hunters or orchid traffickers. In this area, they're abundant and have value in the black market. I reported the marks in my daily report and asked for support to patrol that area thoroughly. But since there was no proof of illegal activity, they didn't give it priority. They recommended I just register them as suspicious traces and maintain vigilance. That's what I did. Days later, I saw more on another trail, the Dry Creek Trail. I found similar marks but with different shapes. Now they were squares with a diagonal line. The marks weren't fresh. Some already had dried sap covering the edges. It gave me the impression they had been there for a while, but no one had noticed them. I began to make a map, noting the exact location with my GPS. When I connected the points, I realized the marks formed a route that didn't coincide with any of the official trails. It was as if someone was moving through the undergrowth, leaving a coated trail. Then I started seeing other signals, small piles of stones carefully stacked, hidden at the foot of large trees. Leaves tied with vines in an X shape, stuck on low branches. I even found a figure made of rusted wire tied to a fallen trunk. It had the shape of a cross, but twisted. I took photos of everything. I showed them to Noah, a biologist colleague who works at a monitoring station further north. I showed him the map, the marks. He listened attentively, but shrugged his shoulders. It could be people doing rituals. There are many communities that come to do their things in the forest. You know, cleansings, offerings. These aren't offerings, I told him. It's a path. That same night, while reviewing the photos on my computer, something disturbed me. In one of the images, taken in a clearing near Black Creek, there was a human figure in the background, barely visible. Someone standing among the trees with their back turned. I didn't remember seeing anyone. I enlarged the image. You couldn't distinguish the face, but the posture was strange, as if they were listening to something or waiting. I felt a pressure in my stomach. I decided not to mention it to my superiors for the moment. I didn't want them to think I was exaggerating, or that I had lost my mind from being alone so much in the forest. Instead, I armed myself with courage and decided to follow the path of the marks. I started at dawn, carrying the essentials: radio, water, machete, compass, GPS, flashlight. I left written notice at the base with my projected route. I went into the forest, following the triangular signals. Every certain stretch, a new mark appeared, as if someone had wanted to make sure you didn't get lost. I went through areas I had never stepped foot in. Trees covered with thick moss, roots like serpents, ferns as tall as people. The air became more humid as I advanced. At noon, I found a network of branches tied in a star shape, hanging from a tree with vines. It had black feathers and what looked like human hair. I noted everything down. At 5 in the afternoon, I arrived at a clearing that didn't appear on any of our maps. And there it was, a wooden cabin, semi-hidden among the undergrowth. Not old, not abandoned. It had a metal roof and smoke coming from a small chimney. I crouched behind a fallen trunk. I took out my binoculars. The door opened. A thin man came out with jeans and a green shirt. He looked like a local. He carried a backpack and held a machete in his hand. He wasn't one of our staff. He didn't wear any insignia, any distinctive mark. He walked to a nearby tree and began to make another mark on the bark. A diamond this time. He went back inside. I stayed there for at least an hour. I didn't see anyone else, but I heard voices inside. At least 2 more people. They weren't local indigenous people. They spoke Spanish with an accent, yes, but there was something strange in the tone, as if they were reading something. One said numbers. Another responded with short syllables. I retreated before nightfall. I returned to my station with my heart racing. That night I didn't sleep well. I called Noah the next day. I told him everything. "That doesn't sound good, Mariana," he told me. "It could be a trafficking network, people or animals, and if they saw you." I didn't finish listening. I went to the base. I spoke with my boss, Alina. I showed her the map, the photos, the video I managed to record from the clearing. They told me they would escalate it with the National Guard. They asked me not to return alone to that area. 2 days later, the cabin disappeared. We went back with 2 armed elements. The clearing was there, yes, but there was no trace of smoke or recent marks. The earth seemed disturbed. We found some remains of a fire, food cans, and a tarp partially buried. There were no footprints. There were no marks on the trees. The path of signals I had followed with so much care had disappeared, but not completely. A week later, when I left early for my round, I found a triangle carved on the door of my station. A perfect triangle, fresh, made with a knife. There are no words to describe what I felt. A kind of hot cold entered me, as if my body understood before my mind. Someone had followed me. Someone wanted me to know that they were no longer the ones leaving signals. Now I was the signal. Since then I sleep with the lamp on. I stopped patrolling alone. I moved temporarily to the preserve offices, closer to the main road. But sometimes at dawn, when there's fog, I swear I see new marks on the trees, as if they were inviting me to follow another path. One that doesn't appear on maps. One that someone designed with patience. One that still isn't finished. And if you ask me what I discovered in there, I'll tell you. It wasn't a ritual. It wasn't smuggling. It wasn't just another camp. It was a network. A network of people who use the forest like a board game, who leave signals among themselves like breadcrumbs on the mountain. And now that I know, I have a certainty that doesn't let me sleep. I shouldn't have followed the trail, because now I'm part of it. Since I found that mark on my door, that perfectly carved triangle, I stopped feeling safe anywhere. Not at the Park Service station, not at the base camp, not even in the offices in San Antonio when I went to file the internal report. Something happened that I hadn't anticipated. Noah, my biologist colleague, disappeared. It was one January morning. He went out with his equipment to monitor green jays in the Cascade Falls area. The aerial patrol saw him camp at the agreed point. Then there were no more traces. No return footprints, no radio signals. They sent a squad to look for him. They only found his GPS thrown next to a mossy rock, still on, marking a route that didn't match the official one. It wasn't normal for Noah to do that. He knew the protocols well. When they told me, I felt like an icy current ran down my spine. It wasn't my fault, I knew, but he was the one who encouraged me to follow the trail. He was the one who saw the photos, the map, the only one I really trusted. A week later, a box without a return address arrived at the office. Small, cardboard. It had no data. Only my name written in black marker in handwriting I didn't recognize. The office staff left it on my desk thinking it was field material, or something I had ordered. I opened it. Inside, wrapped in wet newspaper, was a bundle of dried vines braided in a diamond shape. A figure identical to those I had seen tied to trees inside the forest. Attached to the braid with electrical tape was a USB memory stick. I took it to my personal computer. My hands were shaking. There was only one video file, untitled, undated. I opened it. It was a nighttime recording made with a portable infrared camera. The image was greenish, grainy. You could see Noah with a sleepy face and flashlight in hand, walking among dense trees. He was breathing heavily. He was alone. The video lasted exactly 5 minutes. In the last 30 seconds, the camera swung abruptly toward a clearing. There were human figures among the trees, standing. You couldn't see their faces, only the silhouettes. And just when Noah pointed the flashlight toward one of them, the screen went black. End of video. No screams were heard. There was no blood, just a silence that said more than any sound. I went directly to the regional chief. "Why didn't you report this from before?" she asked me without looking up from the paper. "Because you didn't believe me the first time." They took the box, called the state police. They interviewed me twice. They sent the USB to be analyzed in the Capitol, but I already knew what they were going to say. No clear evidence. The video could have been manipulated. We don't know if it was recorded inside the preserve. There aren't sufficient elements to open a formal investigation. A few days later, they asked me to take vacation time to calm down. It was an elegant way of telling me I was causing noise. But I didn't stay quiet. I went back to my map, to the points I had marked from the beginning. The marks, the triangles, the diamonds, the stone piles. The pattern was still there. A hidden path, a network, and a zone in the center that I still hadn't fully explored. The mountain called informally by locals Shadow Blue. It doesn't appear with that name on maps. It's a promontory of dense vegetation where almost no light or sound enters. A zone that workers avoid for practical reasons. Too steep, unstable terrain. But that locals mention with respect. "You go in there, but not everyone comes out," Don Teofilo, an old man from Blue Stone, told me when I asked. "Why? Because it's not for just anyone. There are things buried, things from before." I went back alone. It wasn't the smartest decision, I know. I loaded my complete equipment. I left my route registered, recorded in a voice note on my cell phone, sent to a friend outside the state. I entered Shadow Blue from the north side, where the trees close like a dome and moss covers even the stones. I walked for hours without marks, without signals, until I reached a rock formation in the shape of a horseshoe. There I found something that took my breath away, an underground camp, not like the one I had seen before. This one was hidden under the undergrowth, with a burrow-type entrance covered with dry branches and loose earth. I descended carefully. It was an ample space with earth walls reinforced with logs. There were benches, blackboards with numbers, codes, drawn routes, and the worst, photographs, dozens. People all taken in the forest. Some were tourists, others were rangers, and others were indigenous people from nearby communities. I saw at least 6 faces I recognized. Colleagues, locals, the occasional guide, and Noah. He was in the lower corner of a blackboard, a photo taken from above, looking at the ground. I felt my head spinning. I took out my cell phone to record, but just when I started filming, I heard footsteps outside. Slow, measured. I turned off the flashlight. I crouched behind a pile of burlap sacks. 2 people entered. I didn't see them, but their voices were different. A man and a woman. They spoke quietly. They didn't mention names. One said, "The GPS one is still missing." And the other responded, "She already marked her entrance. She has no exit." It took me seconds to understand. The GPS one is me, because only I had registered every mark, every coordinate. Only I had connected them. I don't know how I got out of there. I ran in the darkness. I tore my arm on a thorn. I left my machete behind. I fell at least twice. I didn't look back. I reached the base station at dawn, dehydrated, shaking. I didn't say anything at the moment. I waited a day, then requested a formal transfer. They didn't ask me why. They accepted without problems. Now I'm assigned to Guadalupe Mountains National Park in western Texas. Less dense, more people, more open. But every so often, when I'm alone on the trail, I find myself looking at the trees, searching for triangles, diamonds, or new marks that I didn't make. And sometimes, for seconds, I have the sensation that someone is watching me from deep in the forest. It's not a myth. It's not a rural legend. It's real. There are people using the forests as hidden routes, as labyrinths, as networks of transport that the system doesn't see. And some of us are just points on their maps. I no longer want to know how many are inside. I just want to make sure I'm not the next marker. My name is Diego Restrepo. I'm 17 years old, and I was born in Flagstaff. But I've spent my whole life going back and forth to Jerome, because that's where my grandmother lives. Since I was a kid, I was fascinated by that town with its winding streets, the Holy Family Chapel, the tunnels that seem endless, and the hills that surround it like they're protecting it from something. Though I always had the feeling that instead of protecting, those hills were hiding something. The story I'm going to tell isn't about ghosts or floating things. It's worse, because everything that happened still haunts me, and what I saw down there is still alive. I'm sure of it. It was last July, peak summer. I returned to Jerome with my friends from Flagstaff: Chuck, the most daring one, Gabby, who, although she was more serious, always said yes to everything, and Lewis, my best friend since middle school. We wanted to do something different, something that wasn't in the tour or Instagram photos. So when one of the local kids told us about a cave that was forbidden, well, it was decided we had to go. It's been closed since the 80s, who knows why, Julio, the local, told us. It's up from the auditorium shaft, but on the other side, toward the hill. You have to walk like 40 minutes. Nobody goes in there because it's sealed with metal plates. They say that mine wasn't normal, that they were extracting other things. What other things? Chuck asked, laughing. Julio shrugged. I don't know, but my uncle says it wasn't copper they were mining. That down there were rooms like a hospital, and you could hear screaming. Maybe it was for crazy people or for drug dealers, Lewis said. What? Julio said. Just drunk stories. But I saw how Julio looked down. He wasn't joking, and that stuck in my head. That same night we planned to go. I was the first to say it. Let's go. I'll go in first. Let's see who dares. I regret it every second since then. We left at dawn the next day with backpacks, headlamps, ropes, water, and even a knife I stole from my grandfather without him noticing. We walked the trails behind the auditorium through the prickly pears and low bushes that crackled. There was no signal, just the view of the purple hills in the distance, and dry air entering through the nose like ground earth. Julio guided us until we reached the entrance, a natural opening between rocks halfway up the hill. It was sealed, yes, but not like I'd imagined. It wasn't bars or a wall, but steel plates riveted together, rusted like old container metal. The strangest thing was they were secured with barbed wire from the inside. Who seals a cave from the inside? Here it is, Julio said, and left us alone. He said he wouldn't go down, not even for $100. It took us an hour to force the entrance. Chuck brought a steel bar. With prying, we managed to open a crack just at the edge of the floor, enough to slip in one by one. Lewis was the first to back out. He said he wasn't going to get in. But I had already talked too much, and the pressure wouldn't let me chicken out. I went in with the lamp on and my mouth dry. Gabby and Chuck entered behind me. Inside, the air was thick, like old. It didn't smell of humidity or earth. It smelled weird, like hot metal, like dried blood. We advanced in line through a narrow tunnel that descended in a spiral. The walls weren't like other mines I'd seen in town. They didn't have pick marks or cart rails. They were smooth, too smooth, as if someone had polished them. And as we went down, we started to see pipes. "What the hell?" Chuck murmured. "Why are there pipes?" I didn't know what to answer. The pipes ran along the ceiling, some hung down, and others went straight into the walls. But they weren't copper or galvanized. They were black, thick, industrial. After about 10 minutes of descent, we reached a kind of wider gallery with stained concrete walls. On one side, there was a metal door ajar. It had faded letters painted with stencil. "Restricted Area, Level 3, UCPS." I didn't know what it meant. Nobody did. But that's when we started to feel the silence. Not the outside silence of the mountains, but a thick silence, as if the place absorbed sound. "There are rooms," Gabby said. "Look." Yes, behind the door was a hallway, and on the sides, rooms with broken glass, metal beds, and hooks on the walls. There were no mattresses, just rust marks where they had been. In one of the rooms, Chuck found a notebook. It was half burned, but you could read things. Subject 2 does not respond to Compound 4. Prolonged isolation initiated. Aggression levels increase in complete darkness. From day 23, subject only communicates through deep breathing and knocking. Gabby dropped it. I wanted to leave at that point. I felt something was wrong, that we weren't in a mine, but in some kind of underground experiment, military, private. I don't know. But it was clear they were locking people up down there. And suddenly we heard a knock. Not a cave-in or a falling stone. It was a rhythmic knock, 3 times, as if someone was hitting a wall with their fist. Chuck laughed nervously. "Wind," he said. "But in caves, there's no wind that hits walls rhythmically." Lewis shouted from the entrance that he could no longer hear our voices. We ran back, but what we found was a second door. We hadn't seen it when we came down. It was right before the exit tunnel, and it had a new latch. Someone after us had closed it. They had trapped us. Gabby started crying. Chuck kicked the door furiously. I sat trembling because at that moment I understood something. We weren't alone. It wasn't a presence. It was something real that still lived there, or that never left. From inside the hallway came a long, deep breathing, as if it came from an enormous chest. And then footsteps, not dragging, strong, heavy, as if something was walking with the entire sole of its foot on the concrete. Lewis shouted that he was going to look for help, but we were trapped. Chuck had his knife in his hand. I had the lamp. Gabby prayed in a low voice, and that, instead of calming me, made me worse because I felt there was nothing to pray for that would work down there. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. The sound returned, more breathing, a knock, another, silence. Until something scratched the wall right next to us, as if it knew where we were. Chuck didn't wait anymore. He hit the door with a rock until the latch broke. We ran out, climbed through the tunnel like crazy, and behind us we could hear the footsteps. I never saw what it was, but I didn't need to see it. I felt how the air moved behind us, as if something enormous was following us. We came out. Gabby vomited at the entrance. Chuck stayed silent. I fainted. Lewis had returned with Julio and 2 other men from town. We told them everything. Nobody wanted to go back in. Julio just said, "I warned you. That's not a cave, it's a pit. A pit for things that should never have existed." Since then, I've had nightmares. Gabby doesn't talk about it anymore. Chuck went to live with a cousin in Phoenix. Louis doesn't look at me the same way. And me, every time I hear deep breathing, even if it's in a movie, I freeze. Sometimes a thought comes to me that turns my stomach. What lives down there didn't follow us because it didn't want to, not because it couldn't. And I wonder what will happen when it decides to come out, when it gets hungry, when it has no one left to smell but those up above. Jerome is beautiful, magical, as the brochures say. But if you get off the path, if you look beyond the pretty tunnels and craft shops, you can run into the scars left by others, things that didn't make it into the newspapers, places where the government buried its secrets underground, and then pretended they never existed. That cave is sealed again, this time with concrete and rebar. But something is still breathing down there, and I heard it. I provoked it. And someday, it's going to come back up. My name is Luis Montero, and I'm 34 years old. I'm not a professional explorer or a university researcher, much less part of an official spelunking group. I'm a freelance photographer, and for the past 5 years, I've been documenting natural landscapes and forgotten places across America. My fixation with caves started after a bad breakup. I needed space, silence, distance. I gradually got into the underground world. First it was Mammoth Cave in Kentucky, then Carlsbad Caverns, and so on until one afternoon, browsing old Reddit forums and poorly designed websites of retired geologists, I read about a zone closed to the public within the Luray Caverns system in Virginia. I'm not talking about the tourist route, with handrails and guides telling legends in half-light. I'm talking about the secondary systems, the nameless tunnels, the branches that don't appear on official maps, and that, according to some experts, reach unexplored zones deep in the Blue Ridge Mountains. I got a partial permit as a documentary photographer through a contact at the National Park Service. I'd be accompanied by a local guide, Hugo, young, nervous, but friendly. We made 2 visits in February to mark safe routes and test equipment. Everything went well until the guide warned me. Look, Mr. Lewis, there are zones where even the bats don't go anymore. And I'm not saying this just to say it. It's not because of gas or cave-ins. It's because there's something strange there. And I'm not talking about the supernatural, its people, or something like that. I thought he was talking about trespassers or hidden drug dealers, or maybe crazy people like me looking for strange thrills. But his tone wasn't sensationalist. It was cautious, prudent. We made the entry into the deep system on Monday, March 11th. We carried food for 3 days, spare lamps, radios, external batteries, photographic equipment, compass, and the old map from the National Speleological Society from 1982. What we were going to traverse were passages barely marked as R9 and R11, no names, no descriptions. The humidity was absolute. The air smelled of wet stone, moss, and silence. During the first hours, everything was fascinating: giant stalactites, curved tunnels, caverns so high that the lamp couldn't reach the ceiling. The cave makes you feel like an insignificant insect. We slept the first night on a dry ledge next to a gallery of limestone formations. I turned off the lamp and recorded ambient audio, constant dripping, filtered air from underground, sometimes a light buzzing like insects. All normal. Until Hugo woke me at 4 in the morning. "Listen to that," he whispered. I sharpened my hearing. It was a click, 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 like little stones hitting each other. I thought it was dripping on rock, but it repeated at regular intervals every 5 seconds. I recorded it with my phone. The sound seemed to move in the darkness. We turned on the lamps, we saw nothing. I thought it could be an animal, but Hugo didn't think so. "That's not an animal. It's like a warning, as if they're telling us we've gone too far." The next morning, we continued forward. It was my mistake. On the third day, about 40 meters from point R11, we found an impossible structure. In the middle of the tunnel, right at the foot of a calcified column, there was a wall of stones arranged by hand. It wasn't a natural cave-in. It was a rudimentary wall of rounded stones piled with dried mud and branches as reinforcement. It measured a little more than 5 feet high. Behind it, the tunnel continued. I stayed observing. Hugo didn't want to approach. No, you can't go there. They don't want you to." "Who?" "Those who don't come out. That's what they call those who stayed." I questioned him, but he just crossed himself. He left me alone to go check a deviation behind us, supposedly to check stability. Stubborn as I was, I dismantled part of the wall, just a little, enough to pass through. I crossed crawling and advanced with the camera in hand. A few meters ahead, I found a lock of hair hanging from a low stalactite. Human, black, tied with a thin thread. And further ahead, something even more disturbing, a clay figure on a stone. It had no face, just sunken eyes and nail marks on the abdomen, as if someone had tried to open its stomach. The tunnel became narrower. The humidity transformed into warm vapor. The smell then changed. It stopped smelling like stone and started smelling like someone. That faint odor of dirty clothes, old sweat, of human existence locked up. I returned to Hugo. He was pale. He said nothing, but I knew he understood. That night was the hardest, not because of cold or hunger, but because someone whistled. It wasn't a bat, it wasn't the wind. It was a deliberate whistle, a broken melody repeated 3 times from the tunnel where I had returned. We didn't sleep a minute. The next morning, while we prepared everything to return, we noticed something. Our safety rope had been cut. Not broken, not rotted cut with a blade, like by knife or razor. We had to use the backup rope. It was a slower climb. With each step, fear pushed us upward. Back at the main entrance, we reported to the park administration about the presence of human structures and possible trespassers. They told us they already knew that those zones were marked as unsafe, not because of cave-ins or gas, but because of unauthorized human presence. There have been other curious people. Some return, others don't. I showed them the photos, the wall, the lock of hair, the clay figure. Nobody wanted to see them. 2 weeks later, from the safety of my apartment in Washington, D.C., I started reviewing the audios recorded in the cave. In one of them, while I was sleeping, something can be heard. I repeat it over and over. I don't understand it completely. It's a soft murmur, almost imperceptible, like someone talking under their breath. "Don't take us out, don't take us out. Here is down." Since then, I've received 3 strange emails, no subject, just one line, "Don't come back." And an attached image, my photo, the one I took in front of the wall, but from the other side, from inside. I don't plan to return. But Luray Caverns is still there, visited by tourists every weekend with yellow lights and guide jokes. And further down in the nameless tunnels, are they those who chose to stay? or those who could never leave. My name is Luis Alberto Mendoza. I'm 28 years old, and I was born in Denver. Although my family on my mother's side is from a mountain town called Cedar Ridge in the Sierra Nevada, between Truckee and Lake Tahoe in California, I never felt especially connected to that part of my family. My mother was reserved about everything related to her childhood, and although we went every December to the town, we never stayed more than a couple of days. That's why I was so surprised when in 2022, after the death of my maternal grandfather, Don Anselmo, I was notified that he had left me a piece of land. Almost 5 acres registered in his name for decades, but never inhabited. A piece of forest land, they said vacant. It was right at the edge of an old mule trail that almost nobody used anymore. About a 2-hour walk from Cedar Ridge. I didn't understand why he left it to me. He had other grandchildren closer, more rural. But according to the notarial act, it was my grandfather's express will that the land be mine. They gave it to me along with an old envelope that had his handwriting, poorly traced by age. It said only this: "Louis, don't go alone. The forest keeps things that city people don't understand. If you decide to clear the land, don't dig or touch what's underground. Not everything that smells of death is recent." I thought it was some superstition, typical mountain folklore. I didn't pay attention to it. A few months later, when I finished a heavy work period, I'm a freelance graphic designer, I decided to go to the land. I thought I could clear it a bit, maybe put up a small cabin, use it as a place to rest. The idea of having my own place where I could disconnect from the world excited me. I left on a Thursday from Denver with a backpack, basic tools, a camping tent, and a shovel. I arrived in Cedar Ridge in the afternoon. I was still recognized by Mrs. Lucha from the store and old Julian, who asked me if I was going to see Anselmo's lot. When I said yes, he got serious. "Don't stay too long, kid. That land is heavy." I asked him what he meant, but he didn't answer. He offered me a flashlight with big batteries. "In case it gets laid up there," he said. I slept at a distant aunt's house that night, and the next day, with help from a young man from town named Ramiro, we loaded things onto some mules and started up. The path was steep, rocky, surrounded by pines and manzanita bushes. The land was on a small plateau overlooking the valley. It seemed abandoned since forever. There were no remains of construction, just loose dirt, a few twisted trees, and a strange peace that made me uncomfortable from the first moment. Ramiro helped me set up the tent and clear some brush. He told me he couldn't stay because his father was sick, but that he'd come down the next day to see if I needed anything. He left me alone around noon. The silence was total, no birds, no insects, just the wind. I decided to explore. With the shovel, I began to remove some dirt from what seemed like a depression in the terrain, a strangely circular hollow. I thought it might be useful to level that part to put a fire pit or place boards. But when I dug a few inches, the metal of the shovel hit something hard. It wasn't stone, it was a concrete lid, poorly made, rough, with what looked like pieces of rebar sticking out the sides. I cleaned with my hands. It was a kind of rectangular slab, poorly fitted, with a rusty ring at one end. I pulled hard, it wouldn't move. I had to use the lever. After several attempts and a lot of sweat, the lid slid a few inches. An intense smell came out sour, like trapped humidity mixed with dead animal. Covering my nose, I opened it completely. It was a rectangular hole about 4 feet deep. Some stone steps went down into the darkness. At the bottom, with the flashlight, I saw a wider space. I thought maybe it was an old water tank or a storage room, but the humidity wasn't natural. It was something else. I went down carefully. The steps creaked under my weight. The flashlight trembled in my hand. I reached an irregular chamber about 10 by 10 feet with a low ceiling. The walls were worked stone, stuck together with lime and earth. The first thing I saw was a pile of rusty objects, a broken wheelbarrow, a bent shovel, a gas lamp. Then in a corner, something I didn't expect, a small human skeleton. The skull had a loose jaw. There were remains of clothing, denim pants, a fabric belt, some decomposed boots. Next to it, a wet and illegible notebook, all covered by a thick layer of dust. The fear hit me suddenly. I didn't touch anything. I got out of the cave almost crawling, with my heart in my throat. I closed the slab as I could and sat a few meters away, without knowing what to do. I thought about going down to town, thought about reporting, but what was I going to say? That I found an old skeleton in a hidden cave. The sun was already going down. I decided to spend the night and think calmly. I didn't sleep well. I heard noises. I don't know if they were real or my imagination. Creaking underground, as if someone was dragging metal against rock. At midnight, the flashlight flickered, and I saw something, a figure peeking from the forest, like a silhouette of someone watching from among the trees. When I pointed the light, there was nobody. At dawn, without breakfast, I took my things and ran down. I didn't wait for Ramiro. I didn't say anything. I went straight to Denver. Days later, I called a friend, Julian, who works in geology and has collaborated with the coroner's office on forensic matters. I told him a softened version of the discovery without saying the exact location. I showed him photos I took quickly before fleeing. He told me something that still weighs on me. "Louis, that's not old. Those remains aren't more than 5 years old. The boots are a recent model, the belt too. That's a person who's probably still on some missing persons list." That's when it hit me. I returned to town weeks later. I went with a lawyer and notified the authorities. The regional sheriff's office took the case. They went up with forensic experts, opened the entrance, found not 1 but 3 bodies total, all with signs of execution. One with hands tied, another with impacts to the skull. Recent tools, and strangest of all, packages of lime in a corner of the cave. They had tried to hide them, but it wasn't an improvised grave. The cave seemed to be used with purpose, as if someone knew it well. The most disturbing thing is that one of the bodies was identified. A young man from Reno who disappeared in 2019, searched for by his family since then. The sheriff's office interrogated me, of course, but I was clean. I inherited the land after those events. However, weeks later I received an anonymous call, a hoarse man's voice. "You already found what wasn't yours," he said. "Close that, don't dig anymore." He hung up. The number was from Nevada. I haven't returned to the land. I ceded it to the government under pressure, with the condition that they include it in the forensic interest zone records. But there are still nights when I dream about the cave, about the sound of concrete sliding, and about something I didn't see but know was there at the bottom, among the shadows, waiting. I inherited land, yes, but not all land is empty. Some keep stories that nobody wanted to tell, and others still aren't finished. You made it to the end of the stories. That means it's the perfect time to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. And if you haven't already, leave a like and drop a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have a great time relaxing, and good night.